distributed here. It's available online for the public and is before the body.
The delegate from Montgomery, Delegate Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's recommendation.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 1719, just to refresh your memory, now as it has been adopted by the House and Senate, will make it so that people who are running for town office in towns of less than 25,000 people file a campaign finance disclosure form if they raise or spend more than $25,000. The governor's action is simple: to amend the legislation to clarify that the limit on expenditures or contributions applies to an election cycle. So just give some time frame for it. I hope it would be the pleasure of the body to accept and adopt the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Next up is House Bill 1911, sponsored by Delegate Peace. House Bill 1911 is an act relating to duties of drivers of vehicles approaching stationary vehicles displaying certain warning lights penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is presently before the body.
The delegate from Hanover, Delegate Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is the move over reform legislation. The governor's recommendation simply adds amber lights. Those are highway maintenance folks and towers to the bill that we passed that made reckless driving on a first offense for failure to move over for red and blue lights. I know of no opposition to this recommendation. I'd move that it be adopted.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
House Bill 1915 is an act relating to health carriers, expedited review of adverse coverage determinations, exhaustion of internal reviews, cancer patients. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online, and it is before the body.
The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, the governor added an emergency clause to the legislation so that the bill could go into immediate effect. The bill passed the House 99 to 0. This will help those that have cancer to be able to do an expedited review as well as not exhaust their internal review process on their insurance. Mr. Speaker, I move we accept the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 26 of the printed calendar, next up is House Bill 1942, which is an act to amend portions of the code relating to behavioral health services, exchange of medical and mental health information and records, correctional facilities. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
The delegate from Albemarle, Delegate Bell.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, this was the bill to improve mental health care at Virginia jails. Part of the process was to coordinate better between care in the community and care within the jail. The governor's amendment merely adds that in addition to contacting the person's care providers in the community, the jail will also make contact with, as appropriate, the individual's family to better coordinate care. I would ask that we accept the governor's amendments.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Next up. House Bill 2141 is an act relating to local service districts, broadband and telecommunications services. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available to the public online, and it is before the body.
Delegate from Stafford, Delegate Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 2141 authorized local governing bodies to contract with broadband service providers to try to tackle the issue that we have with broadband in localities. We have a technical amendment here from DLS. We actually need to go from a big B to a small b so we can define it as megabits per second. I move that we adopt the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no zero.
Ayes 99, no zero. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 28 of the printed calendar, Delegate Robinson's House Bill 2234 is an act relating to parental leave. The governor, his recommendation has been distributed here. It's available to the public online, and it is before the body.
Delegate from Chesterfield, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 2234 is the parental leave bill. We had removed the foster parenting out of the language, and now we're just putting the governor's amendment just puts it back in. And so I move that we accept the governor's amendment.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Carol Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a prior foster parent for 8 years and a caregiver of otherwise homeless children, I remember having a child come into my care, and one of the first nights after I put him to bed, I lay down. And after I fell asleep, I remember something felt strange. And I woke up in the middle of the night, in the dark, to see this child standing over top of me. So I nervously asked the child what was wrong, and he said, "I don't like to fall asleep because when I wake up, no one's ever here." So I came to find out later that this child's parent would wait until he would fall asleep and would leave him home alone for days at a time for a drug binge. This amendment would address that. It would help foster parents, like myself previously, and other caregivers, specifically foster parents, to spend time necessary to get a child acclimated and comfortable with their new parents or caregivers, their new home, their new school, their new doctors, their new friends, their new everything. I would like to thank Delegate Robinson for codifying the governor's executive order establishing parental leave for state employees, and the governor's amendment reestablishing that new foster parents are eligible for the 8 weeks of parental leave. This amendment helps the most vulnerable children who have been abused, neglected, and forever traumatized. It's good to note that this leave can only be used once per year per child. And last session, we acknowledged that Virginia has one of the lowest rates for adoption and foster placement in the country. So let's support families who have opened up their homes and their hearts to our abused, neglected, and abandoned children. And I hope that it is the will of the body to support this amendment. Thank you.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no zero.
Ayes 98, no zero. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
House Bill 2252, patroned by Delegate Head, is an act relating to firearms ordinances, property located in multiple jurisdictions. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
The delegate from Botetourt, Delegate Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, if you will recall, House Bill 2252 deals with when a property owner has a contiguous parcel of property that covers multiple jurisdictions and might have differing firearms ordinances during hunting season. We were trying to get these to where one ordinance would cover the entire parcel of property. DGIF has asked that we give them a chance to take another look at it. They've got some ideas as to how they might better be able to facilitate this, so they're going to make a report to it by these amendments and give us a report before the 2020 session, and then this also adds a reenactment clause. So I would ask that we support the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendations be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 29 of the printed calendar, bill before us, Delegate Krizik's House Bill 2263, which is an act relating to firefighters and emergency medical technicians Procedural Guarantee Act, breach of procedures. The governor's recommendation has been distributed, is available online, and it is before the body.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Krizik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 2263 modifies the existing provisions of the Firefighters EMTS Procedural Guarantee Act by stating that if a breach in procedure occurs, any evidence obtained shall be excluded from any case against the individual. The governor's action would provide a technical and clarifying amendment to replace the word case with administrative hearing. And this amendment clarifies the intent of the bill, which is to maintain the integrity of this code section, ensure that when a procedure is breached, evidence can't be used against the firefighter during an administrative hearing. I move that we adopt the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
House Bill 2296 is an act relating to rights of persons with disabilities, procedure for certain actions, website accessibility. Governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online, and it is before the body.
Delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Lefwich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I believe the clerk's description of the bill adequately reminds the body about what this bill does. The governor's amendment in nature of substitute strips out the notice and cure provisions of the statute, and I would ask the body to reject the amendment in the nature of substitute.
The delegate from Arlington, Delegate Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's amendment.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the body, what the governor's amendment actually does is it protects the Virginians with Disabilities Act. The amendment strengthens protections to ensure that people who are disabled can access critical information on banking and other financial institutions. As we're finding more and more banking services move their services online, it is absolutely essential that this population, probably more than most others, have access to these services. This amendment does remove harmful notice and cure language that would require individuals to wait before seeking to enforce their civil rights. The notice and cure provisions that are in the underlying bill represent an onerous, time-consuming, and potentially expensive burden which is placed squarely on the shoulders of individuals who are blind and vision impaired and deaf in heart and hearing when they simply seek to pursue their civil rights under the ADA in a court of law. I hope it to be the pleasure of the body to move the governor's recommendation.
The delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Lefwich.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the measure.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, just want to remind the body that the underlying bill that was introduced and passed by the House and the Senate also has the protections for citizens with disabilities, audio and hearing impaired and visually impaired citizens. That bill has those protections in the bill. What the bill does, it gives the credit union or the bank an opportunity to cure and requires them to cure it before they are fined or have to settle the matter for a large sum of money. So again, I would ask the body to reject the amendment in the nature of substitute.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, ayes 39, noes 58.
Ayes 39, noes 58. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Continuing on page 29, another bill patroned by Delegate Lefwich, House Bill 2303 is an act relating to sex offenders in emergency shelters, notification, registration, penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online to the public and is presently before the body.
Delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Lefwich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I want to start this bill with a question. How many people in this chamber would expect a citizen of this Commonwealth to know that if a registered sex offender lives within a mile of their house, they have a right to know if they're sleeping next to you in an emergency shelter that they do not have a right to know? That's why this bill is important. The governor's amendments strips out the penalty. How many of you drove up here last night or this morning and saw people speeding? You don't see speed limit 65. If you exceed that, there's no penalty. How many of you have said to your child, get down here right now, I want to count to 10, and when I get to 10, there's no consequences. You can keep your PlayStation. The second part of this bill tells people to develop a plan that does us no good in Hampton's roads this fall when hurricane season hits. I would ask the body and I'd urge the body to reject the governor's amendments.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For more than 20 years, and that's as far back as I can look on LIS, for more than 20 years, we've had the Department of Emergency Services, who in a very studied way, working with localities, comes up with all the important procedures, thinking through exactly what needs to be done under the dire circumstances of an emergency. No locality, no individual in those shelters knows how dire the circumstances may be. This is why you have to carefully think it through and have all of the standard operating procedures carefully delineated to make sure that in the circumstances that may be faced, we don't endanger people by, in fact, having procedures that are going to back up people at the door, that are going to, in fact, endanger the public as a whole. What the governor's amendments do is strike this balance. It turns the decision over to professionals, rather than making it an ad hoc decision, which is what the language would open the door to. In addition, what the governor's language does is it makes sure in that language that the concern of this body is recorded in the code loud and clear, that we are concerned about the public safety regarding the issue of those that are on the sex offender registry. That point is not lost at all. It is just codified in a way that will assure that we have professional standards in carrying it out. I hope it'll be the will of the body to accept the governor's amendments.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 41, noes 56.
Ayes 41, noes 56. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Turning to page 30 of the printed calendar, bill before us is House Bill 2306. It is an act relating to long-term employment support services and extended employment services. Governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
The delegate from Augusta, Delegate Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I'm going to ask that the House reject the governor's recommendation, but I want to explain the reason for that and why. First of all, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this bill, along with Senate Bill 1485, unanimously passed both chambers of the General Assembly and all 6 subcommittee and full committee meetings that were conducted on this legislation. The governor, through his amendment, wants to add a disabled person to the Employment Services Organization steering committee that we created, and on the face of that, that sounds like a good idea. But Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is a board that advocates for disabled citizens who do not fit into the typical working place settings known as what we call competitive integrated settings, but that want to be in a work environment where their peers and others are working with them rather than staying at home and staying in a day-home setting. Mr. Speaker, as you all know, the state program, this is a state program with state dollars, and it actually saves money by keeping our citizens off the Medicaid rolls because of care needs. And since the Virginia Association of Community Rehabilitation Programs represents the vast number of the interests related to ESOs statewide. The other two organizations, Goodwill and APSE, have 5 or 6 ESOs. It was agreed to through the legislative process, that the Virginia Access would receive 1 additional appointment by the Speaker and the Rules Committee. That was a compromise in the legislation. The governor's amendment was offered without contacting Virginia Access or Goodwill to discuss the matter, and APSE, though a very good organization, serves only competitive integrated disabled citizens and is more resistant to the non-competitive integrated settings that we're trying to address. We must represent all disabled citizens, not just those who are equally employable as you and I may be. So, Mr. Speaker, while we support adding disabled individual to the board, the governor rejected 2 counter amendments that we proposed, Senator Hanger and I, that would have done so without disrupting the balance of the board, and that's what the issue is here. Mr. Speaker, also, the counter amendments that we offered would have made one of his 2 appointments the designee, and we also offered removing the APSE appointment by the House and replacing it with a disabled citizen because it would be reflective of their membership. He did not agree to those amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, that's a long explanation for why we need to reject these amendments, but it's important because of the delicate balance that we had related to this legislation. And the main purpose is to make sure individuals that want to work in sheltered workshops have that opportunity. You may remember that the department has been trying to limit or eliminate that possibility and that choice for our disabled citizens. So, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully ask the House to reject the governor's recommendation.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Fullercorn.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the governor's recommendation.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by commending the delegate for HB 2306. I believe we all understand the premise, great intent, great potential as we try to help and continue to work with the disability community. Currently, it would direct the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services to make referrals to any employment services organization that provides competitive and commensurate wages that's eligible to receive long-term employment support services or extended employment services, as the delegate mentioned. The bill also codifies the Employment Service Organization Steering Committee and specifies the specific makeup of the committee. The issue here really is the makeup of the committee, as you heard mentioned. The governor's amendment changes the membership committee by reducing the number of representatives of the Virginia Association of Community Rehabilitation Program from 2 to 1 in order to add a person with a disability who is currently employed in competitive, integrated setting appointed by the Speaker. So the amendment ensures that an individual with a disability who is currently employed serves on the steering committee. As the bill currently is written, there is no representation for a person with a disability on the steering committee. It seems quite clear and obvious. We've made so many strides in the Commonwealth, Mr. Speaker, members of the body, as we continue to empower those with special or different abilities. What the governor is doing here with his amendment is merely providing them a voice. As we also know, through our advocacy and representation of our districts, these are not just statistics and numbers. There are friends, there are loved ones, there are neighbors, and there are constituents, and obviously believe strongly that they deserve an opportunity to be heard and have a seat. It would be terribly disappointing and short-sighted, I believe, to not allow a person or people with a disability to have a voice on a committee that impacts the livelihoods of so many, particularly those specifically in the disability community. The Virginia Association for People Supporting Employment First, or Virginia APSE, as you heard, strongly supports this amendment, and has advocated in support. I hope it'll be the will of the body, Mr. Speaker, to accept the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will Close the roll.
Ayes 47, noes 49.
Ayes 47, noes 49. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Continuing on page 30 of the printed calendar, the bill before us next is House Bill 2328, which is an act relating to the Virginia Public Procurement Act, prescribes subcontracting by certain small businesses. The governor's recommendation is distributed. It's available to the public online, and it is before the body.
Doug from Roanoke, Doug McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers, members of the body. House Bill 2328, if you recall, refers to small businesses that are part of an enhancement program authorized by the governor. When these small businesses receive a contract that is a result of them being in this special category of businesses, it ensures the integrity of that contract and the intent by not allowing that company to subcontract that business, that contract, to a related company that does not fit the same criteria. You may recall this did pass unanimously in the House. The governor's amendment essentially removes the requirement that the person or the small business that received the contract perform the work or otherwise subcontracts it to another company that is of the same nature. I urge that we reject the governor's amendment.
The delegate from Portsmouth, Delegate James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The governor's amendment basically, and I would like to commend the delegate for this legislation because it does seek to solve a problem that does exist. However, the governor's amendment basically changes the word shall to may. And what that would do is eliminate some unintended consequences. This legislation would create an extra restriction on certain small businesses that are not placed on any other group of businesses, and it would have a chilling effect. And so the department basically wants to make the amendment to give the agency some discretion as to whether or not to how to implement this legislation. So I would encourage you all to accept the governor's amendment. Thank you.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 48, noes 49.
Ayes 48, noes 49. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Turning to page 31, bill before us is next is Delegate Rome's House Bill 2339, which is an act relating to the Department of Taxation, sharing information with the Department of Social Services. The governor's recommendation has been distributed here in the chamber. It's available online to the public and is before the body.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The governor amended this legislation to keep the existing authority for the Department of Taxation to share earned income tax credit information that's been in the code now for the last 13 years. And it also adds new authority for the Department of Taxation to share information on a state income tax credit for low-income taxpayers with the Department of Social Services. That part had originally passed the House. And basically the first part of that, this is a technical amendment that came out because the Senate struck an existing line of code that's already been used. So I would move for the body to pass the amendment.
The delegate from Bedford, Doug Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
I rise in opposition to the governor's amendment, and let me remind you why. We had a lot of discussion over this during session, and the bill ended up getting amended in the Senate. And even though there may have been some previous authority, it's not unusual for us to go back and look at agencies and determine whether or not we make changes to the authority. And one concern that many of us have is the privacy of our constituents' personal information. And in this regard, when the bill first came before us, the intent of the legislation was to use this information to facilitate outreach and enrollment related to the federal earned income tax credit. And it was made very clear to us that the information that they use is used for child support, and also so that they could basically go out and solicit and talk to people and get them signed up for services that maybe they perhaps don't have. And there's a lot of concern when we start having government decide different things that they think are relevant for them to go out and start looking at your personal information and guide you down a path of government support for certain things. And so I think there's just a lot of concern about that. The bill was amended in the Senate to take that out to be consistent. We allowed the part with child support in there. So I hope that we would recall those debates and that we would oppose the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes, excuse me, ayes 46, noes 51.
Ayes 46, noes 51. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Continuing on page 31 of the printed calendar, Delegate Wiltz, House Bill 2441 is an act relating to special identification cards without photographs, fee, confidentiality, penalties. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
Delegate from Rockingham, Delegate Wilt.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the governor's amendment to 2441.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the governor's amendment is technical in nature, and it simply says that this ID, like a regular driver's license, must be unexpired for it to be used as proof of legal presence when someone applies for this new kind of special ID card without a photo. I move that we accept the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 0.
Ayes 98, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 32, next up is House Bill 2443, which is an act relating to group health benefit plans, sponsoring associations, the formation of a benefits consortium. The governor's amendment nature substitute has been distributed. It's available online, and it is before the body.
Delegate from Rockingham, Delegate Wilt.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the governor's substitute for House Bill 2443.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I ask that we reject the governor's substitute. Discussion that you heard earlier about Delegate Head's bill, if you'll recall, as this bill went through both bodies, it deals with the same subject matter, group health plans, but it's a lot larger in scope. The governor's substitute, what it does, it kind of guts the bill, Mr. Speaker. A couple of really important things is it removes the ability for associations to negotiate more affordable health care prices for their members. I mean, that's the whole reason for creating this. And it also eliminates the ability of self-employed individuals to be able to join this association. And again, that was part of the reason for the bill. And ironically, Mr. Speaker, that very thing is what Senator Deeds carried. We passed the General Assembly, Governor signed it last year, Senate Bill 672, to do that exact same thing. And so I would ask that we would reject the governor's substitute.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the governor's recommendations on 2443.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to pass along to the body that the administration believes that health insurance should include consumer protections that give Virginians the peace of mind that their coverage will be there in their time of need. That means these principles include covering pre-existing conditions, providing comprehensive coverage, and having accountability to consumers. All consumers have the potential to be harmed by the expansion of substandard plans. Healthier individuals will be incentivized to enroll in less comprehensive plans, but should they ever get sick, most will find that they have inadequate coverage when they need it most. Individuals that stay in the ACA-compliant health plans, those who are sicker or older, will pay more for the same coverage. And this will affect those over the 400% of the federal poverty level the most, the people that we purport to benefit in this legislation. So blocking expansion of these types of policies would slow premium increases for ACA compliant plans. It was mentioned earlier that we have a lot of these association plans already in Virginia, these MIWAs. There are 123 fully insured, and that's important to note. They're fully insured and regulated by the Bureau of Insurance. This bill, like the last bill with the farmers, creates a new benefit category called a consortium. And the consortia issued benefit plans are exempt from all statutory regulations relating to insurance premium rates, policy forms, and policy cancellation and renewal. Consortium plans are not required to cover the essential health benefits that are required under the ACA, as you heard from the gentleman from Roanoke City. Individuals and groups could be charged less or more based on factors such as job classification, age, gender, and industry. In other words, pre-existing conditions. In terms of overall impact on the Virginia health insurance market, as healthier small businesses shift toward association plans like this, premiums are projected to rise for the approximately 334,000 Virginians remaining in the individual market, as well as for the small businesses remaining in the small group market. Individuals who stay in the ACA-compliant health plans, typically older and sicker, as I said earlier, will pay more for the same coverage. So what do we need to do? We need to be accountable. We need to require these consortium to offer benefit plans that are subject to the Bureau of Insurance oversight, provide comprehensive coverage, cover pre-existing conditions, establishing that your health, medical history, or gender cannot affect your premium, and do this in a transparent manner. And that's why I asked the body to accept the governor's comprehensive amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's recommendation.
The delegate has the floor.
So it always sounds so good when we say things like, oh, we want comprehensive coverage, or we don't want these other plans that are bad or junk plans or whatnot. And the question that I always come back to is, okay, great, who gets to decide what's comprehensive and who gets to decide what's junk? I think that should be decided in the marketplace between the people that are actually going to go out and buy the program or buy the plan and the people that are organizing the plan, and other people think it should be decided by the people sitting in this room. I don't want it to be decided by the people sitting in this room. It's not like we have a bunch of health insurance experts in here. And one of my biggest problems with all of this is that if you really think government has just done a bang-up job trying to micromanage health insurance, well then yes, you want the governor's recommendation. But if you think we need to move to a portion where we can give the market flexibility and allow people to be able to get plans that actually fit their needs instead of what the government tells them they should have, then I would ask that we reject the governor's recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 64.
Ayes 34, noes 64. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Next up is House Bill 2477, which is an act relating to electric utility regulations, competitive suppliers. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It is available to the public online, and it is before the body.
Delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 2477 required customers in the ABCO service area who purchase electricity from a competitive provider to pay ABCO for their non-fuel generation capacity cost. What the bill does, what the amendment does, it clarifies that if a customer in that service area would be exempt from the bill if they had already entered into an agreement with a competitive power provider by February 1st, 2019, or if they had an aggregation petition pending at the State Corporation Commission prior to January 1st, 2019. Hope it is the pleasure of the House to adopt the governor's amendments.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Continuing on page 32 of the printed calendar, Delegate Hugo's House Bill 2528 is an act relating to felony homicide, certain drug offenses, penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak to the governor's recommendation.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, let me lay out the problem here, what the bill does, and I appreciate all the work that many people on both sides of the aisle have done to help us with this early in the chairman of the committee. Right now, because of a Supreme Court decision, Woodward, if you give drugs to somebody and they die, and you're standing right there, you can be prosecuted for felony homicide. If you walk around the block and are gone 15 minutes, and they inject those drugs, same vein, or ingest same drugs, and you're just a block away, they can't be prosecuted for felony homicide. Over the last 3 years, we have worked on this bill to get this through the courts committee, work with the House and Senate to do this. Our people are dying at 100 a month in Virginia from opioid deaths. It is plaguing the Commonwealth. What this bill seeks to do is right what it is right that Supreme Court decision and say, if you give somebody drugs and they die, you're going to be prosecuted for felony homicide. We've got to put a stop to what is hurting our families. The governor's amendment is simply an effort to make it look like we voted for something and say we voted for something and not accomplish it. If you talk to the Commonwealth attorneys, what the governor's amendment basically does is take it back what the current law is. It just really goes after the manufacturers, some of the sellers. It doesn't go after a lot of the problem that we face every day here in the Commonwealth. This bill was brought to me by the Attorney General. Last year, 2018, Ralph Northam helped me supported this. This year, this amendment, this recommendation that he brings forward will gut what we are trying to do. I hope it be the will of the body to reject the governor's recommendations. Thank you.
Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Lindsay.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Judge, while I appreciate, well, I say judge because I'm usually in court. Mr. Speaker, while I appreciate the efforts undertaken by my good colleague, I think that something is being missed in this assessment. When you look at the felony homicide rule that they would like to expand to this category, one of the things that I think is missing from the argument is what do we do about the people who otherwise may have been the Good Samaritans, who may have tried to help? A lot of times when you have this expansive nature of what we're trying to do here, you're including too many people in the category, and I submit that this would be one of those occasions. In the instance that's been put forth without the amendment, you prosecute or potentially prosecute relatives, friends, even social acquaintances who were hanging out together and sharing drugs. This bill, I think, is problematic because it does not allow for an exclusion as it relates to gifts, accommodations, or situations where you have individuals who are not doing it for profit but simply sharing drugs. You have a situation, I submit, that people are less than likely to be Good Samaritans and try to render aid, but more likely to run away knowing that if it's known that they were a part of the process, they likewise might be prosecuted. So for that reason, I would recommend that we strongly consider the governor's amendment and vote positively in that respect.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise again to speak to the measure.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, let's look at the numbers. I said 100 a month in Virginia. 71,000 people died of opioid overdoses in the United States in 2017. And my friend from Williamsburg was there when we testified. And we brought people to testify in. And this family, this mother, father, and brother, Delegate Ayala, they were your constituents. They're Prince William. They came in. And I thought, this mother, my wife's here today, we'd be spitting mad. This woman waited 4 hours to testify, and her husband waited 4 hours to testify in the courts committee. And you know, if it had been me, I'd have been hot. And this woman comes to the floor, the podium, and she says, what you don't want is to ever hear the knock on your door, and your husband have to hear it. And the husband testified, you know, I heard my wife screams when I told her our child was dead. This girl, early 20s, from Prince William County, she had gotten hurt being an EMT. She couldn't quite shake. The mother said, I know some of it's her fault, but they gave her those drugs and she's dead now. And I don't know if you saw her, and the mother said, I just don't want it to happen to another family. And I don't know if you saw her up in the gallery. This young woman, she's in Fairfax. She was in a wheelchair. And she came from UVA, took time off from her classes to come down here and testify. And she's written a story, big story, about her brother. He goes, he made mistakes, but somebody gave him the drugs and he is dead now. Shay talks about her brother, he was my protector, best friend, and hero. And this girl, who'll never walk again, made the effort to come to many of our offices door to door and say, help me make sure somebody else's hero doesn't die. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you reject the governor's recommendations. I hope you stand with the victims. I hope you stand with the families. I hope you stand with the Commonwealth attorneys. I hope you stand with the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I hope you stand with the governor of 2018 who was for it. And if you can't stand with them, please be prepared to go sit in the pews in the church as we have to bury these young people that are dying at a rate of 100 a month in our Commonwealth. Again, I hope it's the will of the body to reject the governor's recommendations and protect our families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Richmond City, Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendments.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, we have over the years in Virginia taken a lot of very important steps to try and stem the tide of opioid addiction. I would submit to you and to anyone who's watching that this bill does nothing to help Virginians stop being addicted to drugs. This is another measure which we have done, absent the last few years, of continuing to criminalize addiction. And if we can't have these common sense safeguards, where we're talking about maybe a family member has shared drugs, we want people to help people who have overdosed. The safeguard provision that allows people to get medical attention, stay with the person, be able to relate what is going on with the person who is overdosed. Those are things that will help. But continuing to criminalize a medical condition is not going to solve the opioid addiction problem. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, I would urge us to support this amendment and continue to do the good work that we've done over the years by investing in those resources and supports that truly go to the heart of this issue, which is providing the treatment that the folks who are addicted to these very powerful drugs so desperately need. I would urge the body to support the recommendations.
Speaker. Delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment will save lives in my district. And I want to explain why. Because in my district, there is a massive disparity between my two jurisdictions on the opioid death rate. The opioid death rate in Prince William County is about 10 per 100,000. In the city of Manassas, it's 30 per 100,000. That's a number most similar to Giles County. The city of Manassas has opioid death rates on par with a lot of the worst struck jurisdictions in Southwest Virginia. And what this amendment does is it lets people who are on the scene when somebody is in the process of overdosing call 911 and get an ambulance. Without this amendment, that person would have to weigh the possibility of saving that life against the possibility of catching a felony murder charge. This amendment will save lives in the city of Manassas. This amendment will save lives in Southwest Virginia. This amendment will save lives in all of our districts, Mr. Speaker, and I urge the body to approve the amendment. Thank you.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo rising to ask a question.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a question. Gentleman from Manassas, rise for a question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Carter yields.
No, I appreciate your comments by trying to save lives. Did you see I'm sure you saw the note from the Commonwealth Attorney saying what you're referring to as it's structured here, they see it as unconstitutional. Did you see that?
No, I did not, Mr. Speaker. However, it's not up to the Commonwealth's attorneys to decide what is and what isn't constitutional. That is up to the courts.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 47, noes 51.
Ayes 47, noes 51. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Turning to page 33 of the printed calendar, next up is House Bill 2546, which is an act relating to the maternal mortality review team penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed, available online, and is before the body.
The delegate from Chesterfield, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 2546 just codifies the maternal mortality review team. When the governor's amendments, all it did was go through the bill, and the word death was replaced by the word mortality. And we also added one group to the review team that had inadvertently been left out, which is the Virginia Midwives Alliance. I ask that the body accept the governor's amendments.
Shall the governor's recommendations be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 0.
Ayes 96, noes 0. The governor's recommendations are agreed to.
Turning to page 34 of the printed calendar, next up is House Bill 2615 by Delegate Pillion, which is an act to amend the Code of Virginia relating to capital murder punishment. The governor's amendment has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
Delegate from Washington, Delegate Pillion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The governor's recommendation narrows this bill to specify capital murder of the law enforcement officer. I move that we adopt this recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 0.
Ayes 96, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Continuing on page 34, Delegate Airds, House Bill 2664 is an act relating to payment of wages, statement of earnings. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and is before the body.
The delegate from Petersburg, Delegate Airds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, House Bill 2664 requires employers to provide on each pay date a pay stub or online information detailing the name and address of the employer. The governor's amendment is a technical one, and it replaces the word any on line 38 with the word the to align the language used throughout the sentence. I ask that you accept the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
99, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
House Bill 2686 is an act relating to a Board of Zoning Appeals vote requirement. The governor's recommendation has been distributed. It's available online and it is before the body.
Delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Knight.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 2686 fixes membership voting on Board of Zoning Appeals boards. Now the law says a majority of the board. I believe it needs to say a majority of those present and voting. And I'll give you an example. We all go to subcommittee. Our subcommittees have 22 members on it. If 12 show up, you have a quorum. If you vote on something 11 to 1, Under this rule, it wouldn't pass if it was a Board of Zoning Appeals because it's not a majority of the board. So my simple bill, I thought was simple, just said present and voting. So I asked the governor's office why they amended the bill to make it say may instead of shall. They couldn't answer. And I said, could you get back to me on that? And they still haven't called me. So I asked that we reject the amendment.
Delegate from Charlottesville, Delegate Toscano, getting back to Delegate Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's recommendations.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm sorry that no one called you back. And I understand your pain. You know, as someone... It's becoming increasingly the case. So, ladies and gentlemen of the House, you know, before I came to this august body, I spent 12 years in local government. So I really do feel your pain because I've been frustrated at times about the lack of ability of boards of zoning appeals to do the right thing and get themselves together and make decisions. What the governor has done with this recommendation is simply take a concept which I can identify with, and that is let's get some decisions made quickly, and turn it from a mandate on local government into an option for local government. So if in your jurisdiction, if your local government likes the idea of making the decisions based on the number of members present, they can put into your zoning ordinance and code that provision. But if a place like Fairfax or Albemarle County doesn't like that, they don't have to go with that. And so if you believe that local governments ought to have the flexibility to do what's right to fix the problems in their locality, then vote for the governor's recommendations and give them the flexibility to do that without a mandate from state government. Please vote for the governor's recommendations.
Delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Knight.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
I really appreciate the gentleman taking the governor's position, but he still didn't answer my question. I also came from local government on the Planning Commission, and that's why sometimes we like to have a Dillon Rule state, to have uniformity across the entire state, because when we come up with a really, really good idea and we see something wrong in the code, then we fix it. That's what I propose to do here, is to fix this quirk that nobody can explain why it was ever that way. So what I would ask you to reject the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 48, noes 50.
Ayes 48, noes 50. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Turning to page 35 of the printed calendar, next up is House Bill 2718, which is an act relating to the Interstate 81 Corridor Improvement Fund report. The governor's amendments are printed in the calendar. They're available online, and they have been distributed before the body.
Delegate from Augusta, Delegate Landis.
Mr. Speaker,
quickly, Delegate.
I know this is going to take just a moment, so if you've got one, go smoke one. Cigar, that is. Smoke them if you got them. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, this legislation, as you may recall, House Bill 2718 created the Interstate 81 Improvement Fund, the Interstate 81 Committee, and the Improvement Program. What Governor Northam has done is proposed 28 line amendments to this improvement bill that will amend the legislation in this way. And I'm going to go over these in kind of blocks because that's how they're grouped together and how they impact the legislation. In these 6 blocks, the first thing you'll notice is there's a truck registration fee, There's a regional 2.1% fuels tax. There's a diesel and road tax. There are technical amendments. There's also a kill switch. And there are two other technical amendments related to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Now, first, Mr. Speaker, the truck registration fees, there are 6 amendments that address increasing these registration fees. They are amendments 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, and 19. And Mr. Speaker, the second piece of this is the regional 2.1% fuels tax, which will equate to about 7 cents a gallon. And for those of us that drive somewhat fuel-efficient vehicles, I've calculated that for my car with a 14-gallon tank, it'll cost me per fill-up about $1. So that'd be about $52 a year in additional fuel cost for the average driver. There are 7 amendments related to this, imposing the 2.1% regional fuels tax that will go to the Interstate 81 corridor, just like Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads have done in the past. And those are amendments 2, 6, 8, 12, 15, 21, and 28. Mr. Speaker, the next part is the road tax and diesel tax. There are 9 amendments that address increasing the diesel tax and road tax. They are amendments 3, 5, 9, 11, 14, 16, 20, 22, and 25. These amendments collectively increase the effective diesel rate by $16.83 or $16.83 per gallon over the 3-year period that it's phased in. And Mr. Speaker, the technical amendments, real quickly, there are 3 technical amendments, 17, 18, and 23. Amendment 17 was recommended by the Attorney General to clarify the intent, the language regarding the location of meetings for the Interstate 81 Committee. 18 corrects the title of the Director of Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And Amendment 23 corrects an error in the General Assembly findings related to Interstate 81, which carries 42% of interstate truck traffic, not 42% of all truck traffic. Mr. Speaker, Amendment 24 is otherwise known as the kill switch, and this provision has been included in transportation funding legislation since 2007 and provides that if the revenues raised by the legislation are used for non-transportation purposes, they would expire. Mr. Speaker, the last amendments are related to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and are technical. Amendment 26 states that the revenues from the increased truck registration fees and diesel road taxes may be used to support the debt, or may not be used to support debt, excuse me. And also, Amendment 27 states that the NVTA evaluates the benefit calculation required under the statute, that the revenue from this legislation would be considered to be generated the same as the regional revenues provided by NTVA. Now, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, in sum total, what this will do is provide a funding source for the Interstate 81 Improvement Fund. The governor's amendment will provide $150.8 million a year for the Interstate Corridor Improvement Fund. The fund will implement the 81 Improvement Plan, and it would also provide money for key interstate corridors, and for you, those that live along these, it would provide $39.2 million for Interstate 95, $27.6 million for Interstate 64, $20 million for the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Obviously, that's why those 2 technical amendments were there for the NVTA, and then $42.6 million for improvements to other interstates. Mr. Speaker, it raises revenue through the truck registration fee would be $76 million with the increase, and it would better align our fees related to other states along the corridor. It would also, through the diesel and road tax, would provide $142 million, effectively, as I mentioned, increasing the tax by 16.8 cents per gallon to 40.5 cents per gallon over that 3-year period. And Mr. Speaker, last but not least, it would provide $60 million from the 2.1% regional fuels tax along the corridor, just as again is in place in Nova, Fredericksburg, and Hampton Roads. Mr. Speaker, the other benefit of this from the standpoint of everyone in the state is that it would basically free up about 28% of the funds that are going to, through our Smart Scale program, about $930 million other improvements that are in the other 9 districts across the state, transportation districts. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I'm now going to yield to my good friend, the delegate from Botetourt, Delegate Alston.
From Botetourt, Delegate Alston.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we have before us today an opportunity to address an issue with an interstate system that carries a major portion of our commerce through the Commonwealth. And it's the only interstate in our Commonwealth that does not have a dedicated funding stream. I-81 carries about 41% of all commerce, tractor-trailer traffic up and down I-81. It's a lifeline of Virginia Tech, Radford, other universities, JMU. It's a 50s-era highway. It's had very limited improvements. This is an opportunity that we've reached with the Virginia Truckers Association. They're in agreement with this plan. They're not opposed to it. They came to the table. We identified their contributions to the transportation system in the Commonwealth. We compromised, and we drew a conclusion as to what we felt they were contributing, and they agreed. So they've come to the table. We've got a dedicated funding stream, not only for I-81, but for other interstates, 95 and 64, and other revenues to be used on interstate highways. As Delegate Landis says, this frees up a lot of statewide money through our Smart Scales program. If we had implemented this program 4 years ago on I-81 and this funding stream, it would have freed up $900 million in Smart Scales monies that have been currently used on the interstate system to today. So this is a very important program, and I live on 81. I live right in the middle of I-81, and our valley is very confined. It's very restricted. It's difficult to go anywhere and not travel I-81. So when there are problems, we live through them. You know, there's traffic diversions through small towns. It's compromised older people traveling on rural secondary highways. So this is a really important issue today. So I would ask that we support the governor's recommendations in their entirety. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that we support the governor's recommendations.
Delegate from Lyman, Delegate LaRock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the measures.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking as someone who is very, very attuned and committed to improving Route 81, I have to say that after being down here for a number of sessions, I really was thinking that I started to understand the process. The bill goes to a committee, it's vetted, it's amended, and so on. But what happened to this bill, I just don't know. I printed out the amendments, and it took, I don't know, about 8 or 9 pages, printed both sides, compared to a bill that fit nicely onto a page and a half. So there's something really, really curious about this. This is a major tax increase bill. Let's just call it what it is. We closed this session. We made a genuine attempt, and I think it was a good attempt to pass a bill that moved us in the direction of improving the 81 corridor. It formed a committee. We established the authority to have an account in place to deal with monies, and we left it at that. But for a few people to go behind closed doors and put forward a measure of this magnitude that is significant tax increase without input from the legislature, for the large part, without input from the general public. This just defies any reasonable expectations that the public should have for transparency. I would like to understand this measure, Mr. Speaker, members of the body, but I have a few things that I do during the week, and I spent a lot of time preparing for this session, but I don't fully understand what's going on with all this money. Speaking to just the specifics, I'm most concerned about the clauses or the provisions 19, 20, 21. Again, these are tax and fee increases. I think this is the first set of tax and fee increases that we've passed this session, taking place in a reconvened session. Again, very, very unique, very odd. Number 24 is one that really concerns me, and I'm going to draw attention to that because in that proposed enactment clause, there is some very vague language, and it reminds me of what I think can go wrong with a bill when it isn't given the amount of consideration and dealt with precisely as it should. This contains vague provisions as to the use of funds. It uses the words, and I'm paraphrasing, that the spending will be consistent with the plan. Now, consistent with the plan is very, very broad. There is a plan that can specify specific spending, as there is in place with Route 81 now, and as there should be. But I have watched as the Smart Scale program, which came out of this body with very good intentions, this last round of, third round of scores, leaves people sitting in traffic while monies are being prioritized for bike paths, pedestrian walkways, things that really, really, at the end of the day, don't have very much to do with relieving congestion. And relieving congestion has been defined by this body to be the priority of those monies. That's what happens when you leave too much discretion in a bill, when it's not defined precisely. The same has happened with I-66 tolls inside the Beltway. I sit on the NVTC. We are charged with spending those monies in a way that benefit the toll payers. But because of the very loosely defined parameters, which give the discretion of this body to spend them, again, they're being spent. I use bike paths and pedestrian walkways, which I think are both great. And who can imagine someone proposing those along the I-81 corridor? But mark my words, when you leave the discretion in the hands, and this is effectively will be at the executive level. The planning body can develop a plan, but at the end of the day, the decisions on how this money is spent are going to be defined by those who decide what they feel, in their opinion, is consistent with the plan. So accountability, I think, was one of the most important considerations. I certainly know that Delegate Landis, I was very comforted in knowing that he would be one of the watchdogs in putting the original bill together, knowing that accountability would be a very high priority with him. But while I support this measure overall, I wanted to make it very clear that I think this was drafted hastily. It really does not do the legislative process justice, and I'll be voting against all of these enactments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Botetourt, Delegate Alston.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the delegates' concerns.
Delegate speaking to the governor's recommendations.
Speaking to the governor's recommendations. The I-81 Corridor Improvement Plan defines a group of individuals who will be assigned, both delegates, senators, CTB members, who will be assigned to allocating the funds appropriated to designated projects. The specific language there is planning districts 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That references the 2.1% gas tax that is currently being assessed in Northern Virginia and Tidewater. It brings parity to us as buy-in with the rest of the state. And I think that's important. I think that shows that we're investing. And it's put us at a great disparity over the years because Northern Virginia and Tidewater have been able to buy down the cost of projects. And I fully understand. They're paying their share. And so through this project and this plan, we also will be paying our share. So I think it's a good plan, and I would ask that the body endorse and support the governor's recommendations.
Delegate from Rockingham, Delegate Wilt.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman from Botetourt yield the floor for a question?
Will the delegate from Botetourt yield for a question?
Yes, sir, I will.
Delegate yields.
Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman the plan that he referenced, the various details of what the construction is going to look like on that. Was that just dreamed up in the last part of session, or has that been an ongoing process over the last year?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman from Rockingham, no, that was part of the original I-81 corridor study plan that was defined in the tolling process, which has also been rolled into this plan. So all those procedures, protocol was laid out previously in the original I-81 corridor study plan.
Would the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the delegate yield for another question?
Yes, sir, I'll yield.
Delegate yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, and as far as the funding, when we look at the beginning of session, we had legislation before us, and there was a funding mechanism there. And throughout the legislative process, it was there, and then it wasn't, and then there was something different, and then there wasn't. I mean, so I'd ask the delegate, in his estimation, has there a wide variety of funding plans been included for our perusal throughout the legislative session?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the delegate from Rockingham, yes, that's correct. There's been multiple options of revenue sources looked at. It's been studied. There were some concerns from a truckers association. We tried to reach common ground with them, which we have. We have buy-in from the truckers in regard to the registration fee and the diesel fuel tax. So I think there's been multiple opportunities of conversation on this legislation throughout the whole process.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 58, noes 39.
Ayes 58, noes 39. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Continuing with House bills with recommendations by the governor, just a couple more in this category. On page 41 of the printed calendar, next up is Delegate Bulova's House Bill 2762, which is an act relating to firefighter foam management. The governor's amendment has been distributed, is available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Bulova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I'm going to ask that we accept the governor's recommendation. The purpose of the original bill is to ensure that firefighting foams that contain fluorine-based chemicals are managed in a way that protects both water quality and public safety. The amendment is technical and just makes it clear that the perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a subset of the broader category of fluorine-based chemicals. I would move that we adopt the amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 42 of the printed calendar, Delegate Byron's House Bill 2766 is an act related to a Certificate of Public Need charity care. The governor's recommendation to House Bill 2766 has been distributed, is available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Bedford, Delegate Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the governor's amendment is a technical amendment. It just ensures that nursing homes are exempt from charity care reporting. This was consistent with the beginning of the bill. It ensures that a spot that we missed later on, that was included in that as well. So I hope we would accept the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 0.
Ayes 98, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to. The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Roan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having voted on the prevailing side by which we rejected the governor's amendment to House Bill 2339, I motion to reconsider so that we can have another motion to sever the amendments.
Page 31.
Delegate Rome moves that having voted on the prevailing side, the House reconsider the vote by which it rejected the governor's amendments on HB 2339. This meeting is in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. That motion carries, and that bill is reconsidered. So we have HB 2339 in front of us.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
Delegate from Bedford, Delegate Byrne.
Point of order is what I meant.
I know what you meant.
That came so quickly, I was just trying to figure out what the severing was before
Well, I
we
think
voted
the motion really doesn't have anything to do with severing. She made the motion basically to reconsider the bill. And then, of course, I think she gave the reason that she wants to sever, but she did vote on the prevailing side. So,
Okay.
Delegate from Prince William, Delegate Rome.
Mr. Speaker, I motion to sever the amendments. I move to sever the amendments.
It's just a, you can, yeah, just.
Okay, then, Mr. Speaker, speaking to the First Amendment?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this First Amendment here, regardless of what members, their personal preferences on the Second Amendment under consideration here, on the first one in particular, this is the section of code that DSS needs in order to implement section 63.2-527, notice of the earned income tax credit, that's been on the books now for 13 years. This is existing code that we already have. This is something that DSS uses routinely to work with the Department of Taxation as it is right now. And so basically the Senate substitute limited the authority of the Department of Taxation to comply with existing statute regarding the EITC. The EITC provision was taken away, which eliminates existing statutory authority. This is statutory authority that we need to have on this. So the point of working in good faith, as I had done across the Senate before, was not to subtract language from the existing statute, but to compromise regarding the shared tax information. And so when we originally voted, when that bill came back from the House in the first place, we clarified this is the exact information, the W-2 and 1099s, that Department of Social Services will be requesting from the Department of Taxation, because that was the main concern that came from the House of Delegates. It was a shared concern that came from the State Senate, and we worked it out. However, in the line where it was struck, however, that became a problem. And so all I'm asking here is that we keep the existing code in place on this First Amendment. And so I would move that we vote in favor of the amendment.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a motion.
Delegate has the floor.
I would move that the bill go by temporarily.
Delegate Gilbert moves that HB 2339 go by temporarily. All in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. That bill goes by temporarily. Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Speaker, I rise for another motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I would move that the House stand in recess until 2:35 p.m.
Delegate Gilbert moves the House stay in recess until 2:35 p.m. All those in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. The House stands in recess until 2:35. The delegate from Albemarle, Delegate Bell.
So I would ask we will have a Courts of Justice committee immediately upon recess. We have the approval of the retired judges who wish to sit as substitute judges. It'll be downstairs. It'll take no more than 5 minutes, but I would ask the members of Courts of Justice to go down in the hall so we can get that approval done. Thank you.
Immediately upon the recess, Committee on Courts of Justice will meet here in the Capitol in House Room 1. Once that committee's finished, the Republican caucus will meet immediately upon conclusion of that committee meeting in House Room 1. The Democratic caucus also will be meeting in House Room 2 during the recess.
152 to 235.
So 2339 will go after the budget, right?
From Newport News, Delegate Price.
Speaking to the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate has the floor.
While I do understand that the state police have an issue, the ban is for all state dollars, which would also impact grants that are given to local governments by DCGS. It would also impact localities like mine, not just the sheriffs in rural areas, but sheriffs in urban areas. And so when you have a ban on all state dollars, it's more than just the state police. And I would urge that we would support the amendment.
Delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I do not want to get into a running debate, but that is just factually wrong. There is not any prohibition at the grant level. This deals with state agencies only, period.
Shall the governor's recommendation on Amendment 36 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 48, noes 51.
Ayes 48, noes 51. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
Mr. Speaker, turning to page 24 of the calendar, continuing governor's recommendations to House Bill 1700. Amendment before us is amendment number 39. Amendment number 39, which would remove $40 million earmark of future revenues.
Delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the recommendation.
The delegate has the floor.
I would ask that we would reject the governor's recommendation. If you recall, our budget when we passed out of here had $34 million contained therein to start in this and next year fiscal year to put a down payment towards a future payment. In conference, we came up, Senate finance staff had this idea, which I thought was a good one, which does not start until the next biennium, and this would allow us to set aside, and if you want to call it a sinking fund, dollars that would not be expended until they have been earned by the employment numbers that have been promised, but would put us, on our way of having those dollars available when needed. So I'd ask that we would reject the governor's recommendation.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I understand that the chairman would very much like to squirrel away as much money as he possibly can against future potential liabilities and hide it over here. But that's not the deal that we made with Amazon, and that's not the deal that we talked to our constituents about, and that's not the way this is supposed to work. These Amazon incentive payments are going to pay for themselves, right? We're going to create $150,000 a year jobs, which people are going to pay Virginia income tax on, and let's assume a marginal tax rate after they deduct their personal deductions and their itemized deductions, say we get about 4.5%. So we're looking at about $7,000 in income per job. Oh, by the way, they've got to have these jobs. They have to exist for 4 years, right? Because these are post-performance incentive payments, because we weren't going to pay a bunch of incentives for jobs that might not come and might not generate the revenue that they were promised. And so what has to happen is we'll start making payments on jobs created in 2019 by Amazon. This calendar year, those get paid in fiscal year 2024. Fiscal year 2024. So that's when we've had about 4 years of this income created by these jobs that created $150,000 a year. That's income tax revenue. The incentives are supposed to pay for themselves. I love this deal, by the way. Right? I'm not an anti-Amazon person. I think it's great that we've got Amazon coming to Northern Virginia. I think it's great for the economy. I think it's great that it's going to diversify the economy. I think we made a really smart and good deal by saying that these incentives will pay for themselves and they won't get paid until they pay for themselves. But what this amendment does is it takes money right off the top of the sales tax, right, the new revenue that we're going to get from Wayfair, pulls that money off the top and out of the general fund, right? So that's $40 million more we could have had in our unappropriated balance if we didn't have it here, if that's what you're concerned about. It's money that we could have had for schools. It's money we could have had for community colleges. It's money we could have had for IDDD waivers. It's money we could have spent on all these other things, but we're going to save it just in case we don't generate enough income to pay for the incentives on Amazon. Well, if the incentives don't work out, the law that we passed says this agreement is subject to an appropriation by the General Assembly. So if the deal doesn't work out the way it's supposed to, We can get out of the deal if we don't have the money to pay for it because it's not generating what it's supposed to. Nobody thinks that's going to happen. I think it's a great deal. I think the jobs are going to come. I think it's going to generate revenue that's going to pay for itself. Let's not rob from our other core services in the general fund to set some money aside, which is going to turn into essentially a slush fund to pay for this later. We told our folks these will pay for themselves. Nothing goes out of the general fund. Nothing doesn't take from any other priorities until Amazon generates the income. I think this breaks that deal, and I hope that it'd be the pleasure of the body to accept the governor's amendment for those reasons.
Delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Speaking to the recommendation.
Delegate has the floor.
I guess I'll be the fact checker today. 2021 is when this would actually occur, not 2019. We had money in our budget that we voted on to send to the other end of the Capitol for 2020 for $34 million. We're not squirreling away. We could have hidden the ball, I guess. We could have, the governor took an approach earlier. They were talking about another amendment about we cut something that was in the introduced budget. He took dollars that were that we did for tax relief to pay for a current economic development obligation. So what we're doing here, we could have just put this into the Revenue Reserve Fund. This is escrowed, if you want to use that term. So when that in fact does occur, we will be in a better position to make those payments should we have a downturn. Of course, my seatmate and vice chairman is going to be retiring, former seatmate, this year, but he and I have been through, I think, 3 downturns. And I think that being fiscally responsible is the way for us to go. Not one nickel of this is going to be spent. There's not a slush fund. It's specific for Amazon. The code is very clear what they have to do. And I would agree with the gentleman, we got a great deal with Amazon coming to Virginia. This takes the politics out of it, in my opinion, and ensures that as we get to that point, there will be revenues available to do what needs to be done. And I would ask that we would reject the governor's recommendation.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman resume the floor for question?
Will the delegate yield for a question?
I yield.
Delegate yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, since we're talking about revenues from a sales tax, I wanted to clarify that this would be the state share of the sales tax that we're saving, the 2.5 cents, not the 1 cent to the localities, not 1 cent to the school divisions, not the ½ cent to the Transportation Trust Fund, and those types of things, how the sales tax is divided up currently.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman that is correct, and I appreciate that further clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the government delegate from Loudon, Delegate Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Suffolk
the delegate from Suffolk yield for a question?
I yield.
Delegate yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Simple question. New York, obviously, I think got into a lot of trouble with Amazon and reneging on their deal and basically poisoned the well for them to come there. Would this, have you had any communication from Amazon, would this bill or this vote on this amendment change our relationship with Amazon or the way they view coming to Virginia?
I would say to the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, no. I think this is just good planning on our part. And I thought it was a good idea, and that's why we included it in our final conference report. And I kind of wish it had been my idea.
I thank the gentleman.
Shall the governor's recommendation on Amendment 39 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 40, noes 57.
Ayes 40, noes 57. The governor's amendment is rejected.
And the last amendment to House Bill 1750 by the governor is amendment number 40 at the bottom of page 24 regarding Wayfair 90-day waiver language.
Delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Mr. Speaker, this was a clarifying amendment that basically spoke to the issue of the delay and to make sure that we didn't leave potentially $20 million, I think, on the table. And so I'd ask that we would accept the governor's recommendation. I believe we moved it out of the block for an abstention.
Okay. Shall the governor's recommendation on Amendment 40 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 1, abstentions 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1, abstentions 1. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Having voted on the prevailing side, by which we passed Amendment Number 6, which was item 105, the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, I'd ask that we would reconsider that vote so a member could change their vote.
Delegate Jones moves that having voted on the prevailing side, the House reconsider the vote by which it had passed the governor's recommendation on Amendment 6. All those in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. That motion carries. So we're on Amendment 6. The delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Jones.
Speaker, I would ask that we would accept the governor's recommendations on Amendment Number 6.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, the delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I realize that somebody may have voted wrong, which is maybe the reason they want to go again. I just remind the body there were several people that voted no on this amendment. This is the Housing Trust Fund, and people will want to pay attention so they can vote again accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the governor's recommendation on Amendment Number 6 on the Housing Trust Fund be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 76, noes 23.
Ayes 76, noes 23. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
All right, Mr. Speaker, that completes consideration of House Bill 1700, which is the budget bill. Therefore, we have one additional governor's bill with recommendation, and that is on page 31 of the printed calendar, page 31, Delegate Rome's House Bill 2339, which is an act relating to the Department of Taxation sharing information with the Department of Social Services. The move to reconsider has been accepted and was taken by temporarily, so it is now before the body. Governor's recommendation has been distributed and is available online as well.
Okay, the delegate from Prince William, Delegate Roman, I think we've severed the amendment.
Right, Mr. Speaker, I'll move to withdraw my motion to sever the amendments. We'll just have a regular motion to reconsider. And Mr. Speaker, may I speak to it?
Yeah,
it has.
Delegate, we've already reconsidered, but on the motion on the governor's recommendation,
Right.
Delegate has the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to basically read part of what the existing code here is. So right now where it says, notwithstanding the provisions of subsection A or B or any other provision of this title, the tax commissioner is authorized to, you jump down to number 3, provide the commissioner of the Department of Social Services, upon written request, information on the amount of income, filing status, number, and type of dependents, and this is where we're highlighting here, whether a federal earned income tax credit has been claimed as reported by persons on their state income tax returns who have applied for public assistance or social services benefits as defined by section 63.2-100. That's existing code. That's what we had prior to the Senate substitute coming over. And so this is a part of code that has been around for years. The Department of Social Services has worked in tandem with the Department of Taxation to make sure that they have the most accurate information possible so that they can perform their duties as described by the rest of the code. Now, what we're adding here is to keep this language. We want to keep that language. What we are putting in here, it says whether a federal earned income tax credit as authorized by section 32 of the Internal Revenue Code, and this is the part where we've had the additional, where the Second Amendment comes in, and an income tax credit for low income taxpayers as authorized in 58.1-339.8 have been claimed. Now, when we're talking about this section here, we're dealing, again, number one, with existing code, which we do not want to strip because existing code works, it works well, and we have existing precedent for it working well. The second part builds on that existing precedent of allowing Department of Social Services to continue communicating with the Department of Taxation on a bill that the Department of Social Services asked us to carry, that the Department of Taxation was clear with and okay with in the first place, and that they have spent 3 years working on together. So I guess the bottom line on this here is that when we're dealing with existing precedent, when we're dealing with the existing code, that's why I think that what we have before us here does not hurt anything, especially regarding privacy. We already have the existing precedent to make this work, and I urge the body to please accept the governor's amendment.
Delegate from Bedford, Delegate Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I appreciate the information that was shared with us, those of us that saw the bill through the committee process and the numerous debates on the floor of the House certainly read the code and understand what the code means. Lots of times when we look back at bills that are making changes to the code, we actually realize some things that are in the code that we weren't there before in our own minds and education, and we start to consider whether or not we agree with that, whether someone has had that authority for a certain period of time or not. So what happened during the session was there was a lot of debate about the genuine concerns about the increase of individuals and government agencies that would have access to information, and that we were weakening protection for our citizens. So it went over to the other body. It was in the same situation over there until the Senate Hanger put a substitute on the floor to try and alleviate some of those concerns. And when it came back over, we passed out. Now we're going back to those same concerns again. So I still have grave concerns with the protections we put in place for citizens, whether it was there or not. The intent was never talked about before of what the information is used for. And in today's society, you hear more and more about how information is being misused and how we as a body have to be very careful about what we're using it for. So we have sessions every year just for this reason. So we can come back next year. We have a long session. We can deliberate what those values are. But for now, I would hope that we would continue to reject the governor's amendment.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate Essafor.
Since we're not separating out the amendment, are we in the posture right now that we're going to be voting again on the exact same language, the exact same manner of the recommendation that was just defeated earlier?
It's a do-over.
It's do-over. Great. Thank you.
Delegate from Prince William, Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate Essafor.
Just to address some of the concerns I just heard, during the period between the end of session and before we got here today, I spoke to Senator Hanger on the phone about this, and he was okay with this. Yes, he carried the Senate substitute after he had voted for the original bill that we had that got out of the Finance Committee. A couple of the Senators Newman and Senator McDougal, had raised some concerns in finance. So I went over to Senator McDougal's office, and we presented a series of amendments with this, and that seemed agreeable at the time. It seemed like we were doing okay. Then they held the bill for an extra day. The Senate substitute came around with the intention of clarifying and condensing the language, which was what I was told at the time. Then we passed this through here. Afterward, the Department of Social Services called me and said, hey, this is a problem because of the two sections of code that we're dealing with here. One part of this has been around for 19 years without a problem. Another part of it has been around since 2006, so for 13 years. We're not dealing with something here that has caused problems or has caused privacy concerns. This is just, again, part of their job. And our ability right now is, or what I'm asking the body to do, is to allow them to continue doing their jobs as is and to work with that existing precedent and to understand that we worked in good faith as much as possible on this agency bill, that the agencies tell us that they need to do their jobs even better, while at the same time asking us here to continue doing their job as they are doing it right now. So again, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the body, please pass the amendment. Thank you.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 49, noes 49.
Ayes 49, noes 49. The governor's recommendation is rejected. Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Point of order. Before we, parliamentary inquiry, have we communicated House Bill 1700 to the Senate yet?
We have not.
All right, Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Delegate
I want to revisit for just a second Amendment 7. I've had an opportunity to look at Rule 75, but I've also had an opportunity to look at the Constitution, Article 5, Section 6, which is presentation of bills, executive powers of the governor. And Section 6 says in paragraph B, little 3, that the vote by which each House may agree to the governor's amendments is a majority of the members present.
Point of order.
Delegate Gilbert.
The gentleman is revisiting something, and I'm not sure that's a proper proper thing for which he could have standing to rise and take the floor now to be speaking to something upon which we've already acted. And so I would ask the Speaker to rule that out of order until the gentleman can come up with a way to properly rise and address the issue that he's concerned with.
Mr. Speaker, it's a point of order.
I would say the item's not before us. You would have to, I guess, reconsider the whole thing.
Bring
so,
1700 back.
Yeah, you'd have to bring 1700 back in front of us.
Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate has the floor.
So is it not possible to have the vote which was, if in fact the vote was announced incorrectly but was a passing vote under the Constitution, could it not be communicated to the Senate as having been approved, even though you announced the vote as it having failed, if it turns out that the rule is different than what you had previously said?
Mr. Speaker.
I would say the delegate, I read Rule 75 pretty carefully. I would disagree with the delegate anyway on the ruling, and we're not right now in that posture. So I would say let's proceed with where we're at. Delegate Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, before, I think you anticipated a different motion, but there's a member having voted, I rise for a motion, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
Having voted on the prevailing side by which we rejected the governor's amendment number 39 on page 24, I move that we reconsider that vote so that a member can change or correct their vote.
Okay, number 39, Delegate Gilbert.
We reject. Okay. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate Gilbert moves that having voted on the prevailing side, the House reconsidered the vote by which it failed to agree to recommendation number 39. All those in favor of that motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, that motion carries. Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this was the amendment that the delegate from Suffolk asked us to reject for reasons already articulated. I believe there were 57 votes in the negative, and just drawing members' attention to how they voted previously, as well as the one who voted wrong previously, and I would move that we, again, reject this amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation on amendment number 39 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, noes 60.
Ayes 38, noes 60. The governor's recommendation is rejected. House will be at ease.
It's on, right?
Yeah, that's not.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 5:35 p.m.
Delegate Gilbert moves the House stand in recess until 5:35 p.m. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The House stands in recess until 5:35 p.m.
You are. Mr. Speaker, immediately upon the recess, the Republican caucus will meet in House Room 1. The Democratic caucus also will be meeting, and they'll be meeting in House Room 2.
So we're on vetoes, right?
Read them.
House will come to order. Members, if you'll take your seats. Clerk will continue with the calendar on the vetoed bill at the beginning of the calendar.
Mr. Speaker, continuing with the calendar is directed page 1 of the printed calendar. The next category, House bills vetoed by the governor. House bills vetoed by the governor. Page 1, printed calendar. Bill before us presently is Delegate McGuire's House Bill 2034, an act relating to general registrars, petition for removal. Governor's veto is before the body.
Next bill.
Turning to page 2, Governor's veto for House Bill 2142, patroned by Delegate Thomas. It is an act relating to school protection officers, minimum training standards exemption. The Governor's veto of House Bill 2142 is before the body.
Delegate from Stafford, Delegate Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the Governor's veto.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the safety of our children in public schools is one of the top concerns of parents across the Commonwealth. The General Assembly should be proud of our work this year in this critical area, including a bill we passed to realign school counselor responsibilities and increasing funding assistance for local school divisions so they can upgrade their safety programs. Under current law, localities have two choices for school protection personnel. First, we have a school resource officer who is an employee of the local law enforcement agency who attends an 18-week training program and requires no previous law enforcement experience. They are trained on many topics which are not needed for school security, such as motor vehicle operation or code, radar operation, crash investigation, DUI, animal complaints, and many more topics. The other option is a school security officer, an employee of the school board whose qualifications are a clean record, a high school diploma, and a week-long training under current code. Due to the fiscal strain of local budgets, it is imperative that we allow localities to explore new and innovative ways to address school safety in a fiscally responsible manner to ensure that we promote safety for children in all of our localities by eliminating unrelated training and focusing our limited resources on training for the role of security in our schools. The additional focused training we passed in House Bill 2609 is a good example of such training. House Bill 2142 sought to provide a middle ground between the 1-week and the 18-week options with flexibility for jurisdictions seeking to protect students, teachers, and staff. The veto states that school resource officers have well-defined duties and responsibilities as set forth in the Code of Virginia. I agree. Here's what the code says. A school resource officer means a certified law enforcement officer hired by the local law enforcement agency to provide law enforcement and security services to Virginia public elementary and secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, as you know, when we craft legislation, we often look to the existing code to find our definitions. So the definition for a school protection officer means a retired law enforcement officer hired on a part-time basis by the local law enforcement agency to provide limited law enforcement and security services to Virginia public elementary and secondary schools. Sounds pretty similar. That the governor felt an SRO was well defined in code, but somehow our definition of an SPO, which is nearly identical, is not. It's actually rather perplexing. The use of the term limited law enforcement responsibilities is a golden opportunity for those who feel that having law enforcement officers in schools with the ability to charge young students contributes to early criminal careers. The administration, by excluding those training topics, could have effectively created a school protection officer as a non-chargeable officer. This could have been a win-win for those members who I know are passionate about that issue. The veto statement says it would be impossible for DCJS to develop training standards for a school protection officer. Again, looking to the existing code to craft our legislation, we found we have an existing class of officers commonly known as auxiliary deputies, and they're required to attend level 2 training. This training, however, is not defined in the code either, but it's managed by the professionals at DCJS. My bill takes the same approach. A third item in the veto statement took issue with local law enforcement agencies being able to deliver the training. The level 2 training certification for auxiliary deputies can also be delivered by the local agencies who are trained and certified by DCJS. Why would the administration be opposed to us using that existing approach? Stafford County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Board of Supervisors and the school division, worked extensively to examine and evaluate the safety of each school within our county. They hosted a pilot program where deputies were placed in school settings to protect a few elementary schools. To protect these schools, we had to take the deputies off the streets. The pilot program taught us a very valuable lesson. School personnel and parents wanted more than a mall cop who receives about a week of training. Stafford educators and families want someone with law enforcement experience. Stafford County and neighboring jurisdictions are blessed with a large number of retired law enforcement members. You name it, we've got it. Police, sheriff, FBI, military, Secret Service, the list goes on. Wouldn't these individuals be excellent additions to the school safety environment? We thought so, and so do many of our parents, teachers, and staff. We asked DCJS to work with us to fill our desperate need for safe schools. They said no. No exemptions from or changes to the curriculum for prior law enforcement experience. In localities that cannot recruit school resource officers, students, teachers, and staff will have to continue to rely on personnel with no previous experience and a week-long training. A former Secret Service agent can guard the president, but under current state law, these retired officers will be required to complete that 18-week training academy with all the unnecessary training I previously mentioned. To be clear, House Bill 2142 gave this administration, through DCJS, complete control over the training necessary for an SPO. To quote the governor's own letter, school resource officers and school security officers are required to meet stringent training standards that are administered uniformly through DCJS certification process. I couldn't agree more. DCJS is well suited to set the training standards that would ultimately be used and uniformly administered, and this bill allowed them to do that. From the first sign of resistance during session, it appeared to me that the real debate here is we either make it harder to hire protection for our students or easier. Instead of working with local sheriffs to provide localities with an innovative solution to provide our children with the best possible law enforcement personnel, DCJS and the administration preferred to say no. No, we won't work on any language to address our concerns. No, we won't make any effort to talk to the localities impacted. And no, we will just continue to ignore the law enforcement officials from around the state. who are pleading with us for a solution to recruit personnel to protect our most precious assets, our children. In today's world, the safety of our children is paramount. I know all my colleagues agree that schools should be places of learning, not places of fear. In Stafford County and around the Commonwealth, increasingly the best state in the country for veterans to retire, we have highly skilled, proven law enforcement professionals willing to come out of retirement to help protect our students, teachers, and staff. Mr. Speaker, this is our opportunity to rise to this critical challenge, and for the reasons so stated, I move to override the governor's veto.
Delegate from Richmond City, Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the veto, I guess?
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we debated this bill during the session. I raised several concerns about many of the things that are contained in the veto statement, which the delegate from Stafford has capably read. I think I just want to remind folks and put a different perspective on it that while we certainly all agree that protecting children in and around our schools is of utmost importance, I think how we do that is critically important as well. And I think, unfortunately, school protection officers creating this new class of people who are going to be inside of our schools carrying weapons is not the most effective way to do that. I think there's a couple reasons why. The duties are not defined very well. We don't know where their line begins, and school resource officers or school safety officers ends or begins. I think creating those training standards, because we don't know those lines, will be increasingly difficult for DCJS. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, sometimes we need to have quality, not quantity. And so when we hear that we need to have more people that are protecting our students in our schools with guns, I would counter that and say we need more quality people, the better training standards. I think Delegate Jones had a training bill. We need MOUs that delineate between the law enforcement agencies and the school divisions. So, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, it would be my hope that we would sustain the governor's veto.
Delegate from Fauquier, Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's veto.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly agree with Delegate Bourne. We do need quality over quantity. We do need options for localities. This particular bill is an option for localities to protect our kids. DCJS makes regs on a regular basis to standardize these things. The delegate did an excellent job, in my opinion, of describing between SROs and what he called mall cops. We need something in between. It would be nice to have that option, for law enforcement to establish that option. It is purely, Richmond doesn't necessarily, if Richmond doesn't want this option, they don't have to have this option. If Fauquier wants this option, then they can. That's what we're asking. We're asking for the option to protect our kids. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the House override the governor's veto? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 50, noes 49.
Ayes 50, noes 49. The House fails to override the governor's veto.
Continuing with vetoes, governor's vetoes, page 2, bottom of page 2 of the printed calendar. Next up is House Bill 2253, Delegate Pogge's act relating to non-resident concealed handgun permits, time of issuance.
Clerk will report the next veto.
Turning to page 3, next up is House Bill 2260. It is an act relating to health insurance catastrophic plans. The governor's veto has been distributed, available online before the body.
Clerk will report the next veto.
Next up is House Bill 2269.
Clerk.
House Bill 2269 is an act relating to regional transportation sector emissions program.
Delegate from Franklin, Delegate Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to contest the governor's veto.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this bill simply requires notification of ICE when a release date is determined.
Delegate Poindexter, I think you want to do the next bill, the next veto.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. So, not going to contest HB 2269. If the clerk will report the next veto.
Turning to page 4, Governor's veto of House Bill 2270 is before the body. 2270 is an act relating to release of certain incarcerated aliens from jail. Notice to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The Governor's veto has been distributed, is available online, and is before the body.
The delegate from Franklin, Delegate Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good fruit in his time. Mr. Speaker, I rise to contest the Governor's veto of House Bill 2270.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you. House Bill 2270, very simple, requires notification of ICE when a release date of an illegal alien is known. This is a public safety issue. We have a federal partnership in law enforcement, in health, transportation, education, environment, law enforcement for homicides, rapes, drugs, white-collar crime, and everything. Now, what happens when this notification is provided? ICE receives the information and goes through a risk assessment based on their own database, not what we know at the local jail, but their own database, perhaps FBI, CIA, DIA, even Internet, Interpol, international intelligence agencies, especially in case of widespread drug trafficking, human trafficking, white-collar crime, or whatever. So what the purpose here is just to give the ICE the capability, the opportunity to see if this is one of the really bad criminals that should not be released, and then take the opportunity and bring them in for the proper legal processing. Mr. Speaker, we've had a lot of cases around the United States in the last year or 2 or 3, and that's why this legislation keeps popping up here in other states and other places. Not just New York, California, Washington, D.C., but all around. Another thing we strive for is consistency. In Virginia, we have great pride, and we go to great lengths to maintain our Dillon rule and consistency across every jurisdiction in Virginia. And that's the way it should be, because if you have 1 or 2 or a handful of jurisdictions that are not performing and acting similar and equal to other jurisdictions, then either the bad or the good will go to that jurisdiction, or a few jurisdictions that are not consistent with the rest of the Commonwealth. Now, the governor argues that this bill would take away confidence in the community and law enforcement. It should do just the opposite. Why would a law-abiding community not want criminals removed? So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the body to reject the governor's veto.
Delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the veto.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would actually agree with the gentleman, Delegate Poindexter. I would agree that this is definitely a public safety issue. As written, HB 2270 would eliminate local discretion to determine how they choose to engage with federal immigration agencies. Eliminating this important discretion impedes local decision-making and ties the hands of administrators of local and regional correctional facilities. Public safety agencies across the Commonwealth have a long tradition of engaging in community policing strategies and have recognized how important it is to develop a relationship with immigrant communities in order to keep all of those who live within a community and a locality safe. The safety of our communities requires that all people, whether they're documented or not, feel comfortable, supported, and protected by our public safety agencies. Now, let's be clear. As I've mentioned this before, but in a report of the first 8 months of 2017 in Arlington County, in New American and Latino communities, the reports of domestic violence went down 75%. Reports of sexual violence went down 85%. Now, here's the thing. Were those crimes not happening? They were. But people were not reporting them because they were too scared that if they did, they or their loved ones or their friends would be caught up in the ICE detention process. And also, because they weren't reporting, they became easy targets for bad actors. There are many actions we can take to support public safety and keep Virginians safe. Eliminating discretion and impeding the local decision-making are not appropriate options. If this bill became law, it would send a clear message to people across this Commonwealth that state and local law enforcement officials are to be feared and avoided rather than trusted and engaged. This bill ignores the complicated nature of federal immigration law and requires localities to choose between complying with an ICE detainer or unlawfully detaining someone past their release date. This bill also makes our communities less safe by undermining the important community policing efforts that we've worked so very hard to build. This bill, for so many communities with large and new American populations, makes it harder to support community policing efforts that build trust between police and the community. Please vote to sustain the governor's veto of this bill. Thank you.
Shall the House override delegate from Shenandoah? Shall the House override the governor's veto? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 50, noes 48.
Ayes 50, noes 48. The House fails to override the governor's veto.
Turning to page 5, House Bill 2611 is an act relating to regional greenhouse gas initiative prohibition and participation by the Commonwealth. The governor's veto is distributed, is available online before the body.
Clerk will report the next veto.
House Bill 2749 is an act to amend and reenact portion of the code relating to temporary assistance for needy families, restrictions on use of cash assistance. The governor's vetoes presently before the body.
Clerk will report the next veto.
Turning to page 6, the next governor's veto is to House Bill 2764. It is an act relating to voter registrations, persons assisted with completion of a collection of completed voter registration applications, certain identifying information required. Governor's veto is before the body.
Clerk will go to the next area of the calendar. I think that's it for the vetoes. Mr. Speaker, that completes that category of the calendar. So therefore, turning to page 46, page 46 of the calendar, the House calendar, category of Senate bills with recommendations by the governor. Page 46, printed calendar, next category, Senate bills with recommendations by the governor. Yeah. So first up is Senate Bill 1025. It is an act relating to companion animals, adequate shelter and space. And Ms. Speaker, there were 3 governor's amendments to SB 1025. However, only 2 of them have come over from the Senate, and those are amendments 1 and 2. So amendments 1 and 2 to SB 1025 have been distributed, available online or before the body. Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 1025 strengthens the requirements for providing protective shelter to companion animals such as dogs and cats during extreme weather. It also provides that tethers for companion animals must be at least 10 feet in length or 3 times the length of the animal, whichever is greater. Current law only requires the tether to be 3 times the length of the animal. And I'll speak to the amendments. The first and second line amendments strengthen the tethering requirements to at least 4 times the length of the animal or 15 feet in length, whichever is greater. And we believe that shorter tethers cause some animals to become more aggressive, which can result in harm to humans and the animals. And I hope that it's the will of this body to accept the governor's amendments.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Speaking to the amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, the language that the governor has proposed is actually, with what has come over from the Senate, identical to the language that was in my bill at the first part of this session. However, I stand to encourage the body to reject the governor's amendments, and I'm going to give you 2 major reasons. First, the reason that was, while it was a part of my introduced legislation, when the bill came before this body and passed, it passed in the form you see it, 3 times in 10-foot minimum. That was part of a compromise as it had worked its way through the committee process. I would say to the body that I don't believe the bill would have gotten out of committee had that compromise provision not been part of the legislation coming forward. I would further say to the body that even the bill as it stands
by putting in a 10-foot minimum in length is a new policy of protection. But secondly, if you look at the existing code language, that also a part of the law, and here's the major second reason, any tether has to prevent the animal or tether from becoming entangled with other objects or animals. There is a point whereby you have to draw the line between is the tether long enough to give the animal adequate exercise room versus being so long that they're more in danger of becoming entangled around a tree or other object and therefore strangling and doing harm to the animal. I embrace the underlying bill. I supported the underlying policy all session. I do humbly, though, respect or request that we would reject the governor's recommendations as it is not reflective of the compromise that was agreed to as this bill worked its way through the House.
Shall the governor's recommendation, Amendments 1 and 2, be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 64.
Ayes 34, noes 64. Those amendments 1 and 2 are rejected.
Senate Bill 1047 in the calendar is not before the body, so I'm only going to go to the bills that are actually before the body in the calendar. So at the bottom of page 47, Senate Bill 1087 is an act relating to election districts, remedying split precincts, technical adjustments of legislative district boundaries of House of Delegates and Senate districts. The governor's amendments to SB 1087 have been distributed, available online, or before the body.
Delegate from Spotsylvania, Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
First, I'm going to ask that we reject the governor's amendments. What this does is the governor's amendment conforms the bill to how it was as the Senate passed it. And every year the Senate passes basically the same legislation. And what it is they attempt to pass the buck on fixing split precincts to the localities and place all the burden on the localities. This would be a significant unfunded mandate on localities, and plus it would, I believe, cause a proliferation in very small precincts in order to meet the requirements of the substitute, and thereby significantly increase the cost of elections. So I hope that I will remind the body that we passed a constitutional amendment this session that would hopefully fix this problem of split precincts. Hopefully we'll pass it next year and it will be voted on approved by the voters. So I would ask that we reject the governor's amendment.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You might not be surprised to know that I would ask you to accept the Senate amendment, the governor's recommendation, which brings the bill to look like its passage in the Senate, as the gentleman from Spotsylvania said. There are concerns that the General Assembly's authority to make technical district changes would be unconstitutional. That's why the gentleman put in a constitutional amendment which passed, but it may not be constitutional yet. And I remind the body that we voted on the conference report 54-43 nay, but if we go back to the Senate version, it would be good to do that. So let's support the governor's amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, as I look at the original House version that speaks to one specific code section and minor technical adjustments subsequent to the redistricting, and then I look at the governor's substitute, which speaks to the redistricting process and is drawn to a different code section. Does not the governor's substitute go far beyond the scope of the original legislation and therefore would not be properly before us as being non-germane?
Take a look at it. It's germane. I'm going to rule it germane. Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 49, noes 50.
Ayes 49, noes 50. The amendment is rejected.
Turning to page 48, printed calendar, next bill before us is Senate Bill.
Speaker, I have my request to speak later.
Sorry, it didn't come up. Doug from Norfolk, Delegate Lindsay.
Mr. Speaker, having voted on the prevailing side whereby Senate Bill 1025 successfully passed, I move to reconsider that vote so that the chief patron of that bill can vote correctly this time.
Yeah, they were rejected.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
I suppose I will express this as a parliamentary inquiry. The delegate represented that the bill passed, and I
Should be
understood that
rejected.
the governor's amendments were not accepted. And I don't know if that puts
So
that
you had
in
to
a
be,
different
the
posture.
vote for rejection be on the prevailing side. So,
Then I'll stand corrected, but I still voted the wrong way.
okay. So, gentlemen, delegate voted to reject.
So,
okay.
did vote to reject.
That's fine. Delegate Lindsay moves that having voted on the prevailing side, that's reconsider the vote by which it rejected amendments 1 and 2 to SB 1025. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. All right, that is back before us. Shall the governor's recommendations on amendments 1 and 2 on SB 1025 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 39, noes 60.
Ayes 39, noes 60. The amendments 1 and 2 are rejected.
All right, Mr. Speaker, turning to page 48, Senate Bill 1161 is an act relating to health carriers, expedited reviews of adverse coverage determinations, exhaustion of internal reviews, cancer patients. The governor's recommendations to SB 1161 have been distributed, available online and before the body.
Delegate from Newport News, Delegate Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speak to the governor's amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, Senate Bill 1161 is the same as my bill, House Bill 195, in regards to insurance reviews. Mr. Speaker, the governor's recommendations to add an emergency clause, same as my bill. Mr. Speaker, I move we accept the governor's amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Continuing on page 48, bill before us now is Senate Bill 1455, which is an act relating to state boards of elections, membership, appointment of commissioner of elections. Mr. Speaker, only amendments 6 and 15 are presently before the body.
Delegate from Westmoreland, Delegate Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the same as House Bill 1620 that we previously saw. I would ask that we accept Amendments 6 and 15.
Shall the governor's recommendations on Amendments 6 and 15 to SB 1455 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 0.
Ayes 98, noes 0. The 6 and 15 recommendations are agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, going to page 50. Again, I'm only bringing up the bills that are presently before the body. Page 50, Senate Bill 1494 is an act relating to firefighters and emergency medical technicians Procedural Guarantee Act, breach of procedures. The governor's recommendations to Senate Bill 1494 have been distributed, available online or before the body.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Kriesik.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the same as my earlier bill, HB 2263, which we passed unanimously. I move we accept the recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendations are agreed to.
Remaining on page 50, the next bill is Senate Bill 1521. Senate Bill 1521 is an act relating to handheld photo speed monitoring devices. The governor's amendments to Senate Bill 1521 have been distributed, available online before the body.
Delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Knight.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the amendments.
Delegate has the floor.
Yes, sir. Senate Bill 1521, the governor's amendments put a reenactment clause on this to give the Secretary of Public Safety, Homeland Security, State Police, and others time to study this issue on handheld photo speed monitoring devices. There's also an issue about where the civil penalties should go. They bypass the Appropriations Committee. So I ask that we accept the governor's recommendations.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Turning to page 51, the next bill is Senate Bill 1554. SB 1554 is an act relating to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, civil penalties. The governor's recommendations have been distributed, available online and before the body.
Delegate from Middlesex, Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 1554, the amendment, a few are technical, and Amendment 4 gives the court guidance when imposing civil penalties on a public body when they vote to certify a closed meeting improperly, and I would move to accept the amendments.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Bogler. Shall the governor's recommendations be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendations are agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, turning to page 53, page 53 of the printed calendar. The next bill before the body is Senate Bill 1581. SB 1581 is an act relating to parental leave. The governor's recommendation has been distributed, available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Chesterfield, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, Senate Bill 1581 is the same as House Bill 2234, now that we passed unanimously a little while ago, that has to do with parental leave and reinstating foster placement into the bill. And I ask that we accept the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, turning to page 54, next bill is Senate Bill 1675. Senate Bill 1675 is an act relating to killing or injuring police animals penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed, is available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Hanover, Delegate Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 1675 left this body by a vote of 91 to 7. in favor. And again, I appreciate the bipartisanship on the colleagues on this bill. It was what the bill essentially did was put a establish a mandatory minimum of 6 months for the malicious wounding or killing of a police animal. And it also was a requirement in there that any sentence, the given would have to run consecutively and not concurrently. And of course, what that does is it guarantees that when somebody, maliciously kills or wounds one of these police animals, that, they're actually going to serve time for it. So what the governor's amendment does is essentially just guts the bill and returns it back to the status quo. So I'm going to urge my colleagues to reject the governor's amendment.
Delegate from Norfolk, Douglas Lindsay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the governor's amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
The basic reading of 1675 is it creates a 6-month mandatory minimum term of incarceration for any person who maliciously kills or injures an animal owned, used, or trained by a law enforcement agency, the regional jail, or the Department of Corrections. This legislation requires that the mandatory minimum term be imposed separately and apart and not be able to be run concurrently with any other sentence. The reasons why the governor has asked for this amendment is that sentencing possibilities should be within the range of judges. Sentencing possibilities should be in the range of jurors. Those are the people at ground zero, hearing the facts and being able to assess and determine the propriety of a particular disposition. When we take that out of their hands and we give mandatory minimums on many of these offenses, we're not considering factors that those who are most familiar with the facts and circumstances would know. I recall the good old days when we had Chairman Albo and Chairman Habib, and they talked quite often about the fact that sometimes we go too far in terms of legislating any and every possibility, and we limit the potential for the discretion and the knowledge of the judges that we take painstaking effort to put on the bench. And we say we put them there because we trust their ability to judge appropriately and make the determinations as to what is fitting and just. Also, when you look at some of the studies that have come out, particularly there's a Michigan School of Law study that shows that there is a 1.75% chance that there's a greater chance of these dispositions being imposed on persons who are minorities and persons of color than otherwise. These amendments maintain sentencing discretions and allow judges and jurors to determine the appropriate length of sentence based on circumstances and each individual case. So I'd ask that the governor's veto be sustained.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Will the delegate from Norfolk yield for a question?
Will the delegate from Norfolk yield for a question?
Mr. Speaker, while I very much look forward to the question generally, I'm not going to run this time either. So I'll accept the question.
Delegate yields.
I wasn't sure where he was headed with that, Mr. Speaker, so I appreciate that.
If it makes a difference, no was I, Mr. Speaker.
And I thank the delegate for answering my question. So, Mr. Speaker, the delegate obviously understands very well the criminal justice system, and I respect the depth of knowledge about that. But I would ask the gentleman, he certainly knew all of those things he just articulated when he voted for this bill previously. So I would ask him what has changed with respect to his previous approval of the bill, his statements just now notwithstanding.
A more enlightened point, Mr. Speaker, a more enlightened point of view after having discussed that with members of the governor's staff.
Tempting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 47, noes 50.
Ayes 47, noes 50. The governor's recommendation is rejected.
The next bill before us, Mr. Speaker, is on page 55, Senate Bill 1696. Senate Bill 1696 is an act relating to payment of wages, statement of earnings. Governor's recommendation has been distributed, available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Petersburg, Delegate Aird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 1696 is the companion bill to my House Bill 2664. Again, this bill requires employers to provide employees with a pay stub, and it has a technical amendment that replaces the word any with the word the on line 38, and I ask the body to agree to the governor's recommendation.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
Continuing on page 55 of the calendar, today's calendar, Senate Bill 1716 is before the body. Senate Bill 1716 is an act relating to Interstate 81, a corridor, Interstate 81 Corridor Improvement Fund report. The governor's recommendations have been distributed, available online, or before the body.
Delegate from Botetourt, Delegate Austin.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 1716 is identical to House Bill 2718 that this body passed earlier today, the governor's amendments. This is a funding bill that dedicates funding to I-81 and other interstates in Virginia. I would ask that we accept the governor's amendments.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 60, noes 39.
Ayes 60, noes 39. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
The Speaker, turning to page 61. Page 61 of the calendar, governor's recommendation to Senate Bill 1737 is now before the body. It is an act to provide relief for citizens of the Commonwealth who are employees of contractors of the United States government who have been furloughed or otherwise are or were not receiving wages or payments as a result of the partial closure of the federal government. Governor's recommendation is distributed, available online, is before the body.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Delaney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, SB 1737 grants a 30-day stay of eviction and foreclosure proceedings for tenants and homeowners who can provide written proof that they were furloughed or not receiving wages or payments as a result of the partial closure of the United States government beginning on December 22, 2018. This bill did pass out of the body 99-0. The governor's action is to amend the legislation to add an emergency clause. The emergency clause will allow the bill to take effect immediately, and those who are most impacted need this assistance immediately as opposed to July 1st. So I ask the body to accept the amendment.
Shall the governor's recommendation be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The governor's recommendation is agreed to.
And Mr. Speaker, turning to page 62 of the calendar, page 62, governor's recommendation has been received, governor's recommendation has been received to Senate Bill 1768. Senate Bill 1768 on page 62 is an act relating to use of handheld personal communication devices, highway work zones penalty. The governor's recommendation has been distributed, available online, and is before the body.
Delegate from Powhatan, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask if you have made a determination as to whether the governor's recommendation is germane to the measure.
I would say the delegate from Powhatan, I have. The original purpose of the bill as introduced and is passed by the General Assembly was to address the safety issue to provide any person from holding a handheld personal communication device in his hand while driving a motor vehicle in a highway work zone with certain exceptions. The governor's amendments vastly go beyond the original purpose to expand the prohibition to prohibit any person from holding a handheld personal communications device while driving a motor vehicle on any of the highways of the Commonwealth with certain exceptions. The governor's recommendation is beyond the scope of the original purpose and is not germane, and I so rule.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate has the floor.
I just want to understand the impact of your ruling. So if you're ruling that the bill is not germane, does that mean that the amendment will be, the bill will be communicated back to the governor for further action as though the amendment was defeated, or does that effectively kill the bill?
No, it goes back. Yeah, I mean, it goes back, obviously, with that provision is the original bill. He can either then make a decision what he wants to do with the bill.
Gotcha. And for the parliamentary inquiry?
Delegate has the floor.
So the only way because your ruling is not debatable, the only way to get a debate on this ruling would be under Rule 53, would be to appeal to the House. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe we want to do that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, that completes today's calendar of Senate bills that have been communicated to us with governor's amendments. They have not overridden any SBs, Senate bills with governor's vetoes. So that completes today's calendar.
House will be at ease. Okay, the House will come to order. We're going to go back to the morning hour. Obviously, I think with the gallery, et cetera, we can sort of go straight to morning hour, sort of the fourth block, points of personal privilege. So I'm going to go straight to the delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Philippoine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I am profoundly saddened and disturbed, disappointed. I'm saddened at the heart-wrenching interviews that Dr. Tyson and Ms. Watson gave on national TV. And I'm saddened that so many women and men have similar stories, and that there are still so many more that have not yet shared their experiences related to sexual assault. As truly difficult as Dr. Tyson's and Ms. Watson's interviews were for all of us to watch, I commend their courage in coming forward, and I support their right to share their experiences in such a public fashion. At the same time, I am incredibly disappointed in my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Whatever our policy disagreements, I have always been proud to serve alongside them in the longest-running Democratic body in the Western world. Mr. Speaker, the allegations against our Lieutenant Governor transcend party. And while our Republican colleagues claim to have worked on a bipartisan path, time and time again, they have proven the media headlines are more important to them than due process or even justice. Each of the Republicans' supposed attempts at bipartisan have been nothing more than a gimmick to generate partisan fodder in the news and on social media. Furthermore, when the other side says that we are not willing to discuss a process going forward, the Speaker actually included a copy of our letter to the delegate, Albemarle, in his press release yesterday. And the letter clearly outlines our concerns as well as our desire to discuss process. I encourage everybody in this body to read it. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. When the members on the other side of this aisle falsely claim that those of us on this side of the aisle, Democrats, are against women or against survivors, it is inflammatory, it is hurtful, and it is truly the worst of partisan politics. If anyone wishes to see how Democrats in this body have continuously stood up for women and with survivors of sexual assault, they need to look no further than our legislative records and the work we have done to make the Commonwealth a safer place for women. Just this session, we can look at bills and legislation that Democrats have fought for. To give women equal rights under the United States Constitution, and we were blocked by members on the other side of the aisle. We fought to increase the statute of limitations for sexual assaults, offenses that occur when the victim is a minor. But yet again, we were blocked by the other side of the aisle. We on this side of the aisle fought to prevent persons with temporary protective orders for domestic violence from accessing firearms. But yet again, we were blocked by the other side of the aisle. We fought to expand women's access to reproductive health care and allow women to make their own medically informed decisions. And not only were we blocked by the Republicans, but they actually turned it into yet another social media sideshow. Mr. Speaker, let me state unequivocally, those of us on this side of the aisle, House Democrats, support Dr. Tyson's and Ms. Watson's right to share their stories publicly. Yet on top of our concerns that a hearing by a legislative committee would be completely and utterly unprecedented in the Commonwealth of Virginia, our Republican colleagues have demonstrated that actually they have no intention of making it a non-political, professional, and safe environment in a manner in which would not impede or compromise any ongoing criminal investigation. Mr. Speaker, women, Virginians, Dr. Tyson and Ms. Watson all deserve better than this political spectacle. Thank you.
Delegate from Albemarle, Delegate Bell.
Well, Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
So it was 2 months ago that Dr. Vanessa Tyson released a statement that she'd been sexually assaulted by Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax. She stated that she was an attendee at the Democratic National Convention in 2004 and that while visiting Fairfax's hotel room, he sexually assaulted her. She stated that she was undecided about whether she would speak out publicly because she said, quote, "I knew that if I did so, I would immediately face accusations about my motives, be branded as a liar, as is routinely the case when women come forward with allegations of sexual misconduct against prominent men." Now, once the accusations became public, Lieutenant Governor Fairfax immediately issued his denial. He claimed that the Washington Post had investigated the claims and found, quote, "significant red flags and inconsistencies within the allegation." But we now know that wasn't true. The Post found no such inconsistencies or red flags. Fairfax next said he wanted the FBI to investigate what happened. But he said this knowing that the FBI has no jurisdiction over the matter. Their agents have no legal basis or ability to conduct such an investigation. Lieutenant Governor Fairfax also said there was no sexual assault. He said Tyson was, quote, "very interested in him. She was very much into a consensual encounter." Dr. Tyson says the opposite. She said she cried and gagged and that, quote, "I cannot believe, given my obvious distress, that Mr. Fairfax thought this forced sexual act was consensual." And then Lieutenant Governor Fairfax said the accusation should be disregarded because there was, quote, "zero corroboration." Completely uncorroborated, he said. But then, of course, a few days later, Meredith Watson stepped forward to say she, too, had been sexually assaulted by him while they were students at Duke. In addition, the newspaper report said that her account was corroborated because she'd promptly told someone else what had happened to her. Lastly, some, including some on this very floor, have said that Ms. Watson and Dr. Tyson should be forced to pursue their allegations through the criminal process before we will give them a hearing. But while this is an option for them, that's not what Mrs. Watson and Tyson want to do. So what do they want? They made it very clear. Dr. Tyson said, "I would want Meredith, myself, and Mr. Fairfax to be able to speak, to be heard. And particularly for survivors, I think this is incredibly important. We need to be treated as the human beings that we are." Meredith Watson also called for a public hearing. She said, quote, "I am frustrated by calls for an investigation rather than a public hearing into these matters. Such investigations are secret proceedings out of the public eye, leaving victims vulnerable to selective leaks and smears. And we all know how such investigations end, with inconclusive results. My privacy has already been violated, yet I am still willing to testify under oath." Now, both women have stated that they will only testify if the hearing is bipartisan, if both parties agree to participate and give them their chance to speak, to be heard. This is their request. So to that end, on March 25th, Republicans again proposed a bipartisan hearing. I laid out a detailed proposal for a 2-day hearing before a 5-5 subcommittee, meaning 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, where each side would get to choose its own members. Tyson, Watson, and Fairfax would all be invited, could testify alongside their lawyers, could present other evidence. I proposed time limitations and some general dates. But at the end, I wrote that if the Democrats didn't like any of these provisions, I would welcome, quote, "any counter proposals that would create a bipartisan process to allow the 3 witnesses to testify, present evidence, and answer questions." For example, I said, if you would prefer 4 members or 6 members, I'm open to that. If you would prefer this be done in September, I'm open to that. If you would like to give the witnesses more time to testify, I'm open to that. The goal is to allow all 3 a chance to be heard and taken seriously, as both women have requested. This proposal was rejected. That leaves us where we are today. To be crystal clear, everybody's listening, Ms. Watson and Dr. Tyson want a bipartisan hearing. Republicans want a bipartisan hearing, but the Democrats have rejected our proposal that would have created this. This is good news for Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, but a bad day for sexual assault survivors who simply want their chance to be heard. I underlined this. These women are not even getting a hearing. Now, both sides have issued their press releases calling on Lieutenant Governor Fairfax to resign, but he is still in his office a couple feet from here, presiding over the Senate and breaking tie votes. Everyone says Watson and Tyson should be heard, but when a proposal is made to make this possible, it was blocked. Now, a few moments ago, Minority Leader stated on this floor that the Democrats, quote, "unequivocally support Dr. Tyson's and Ms. Watson's right to share their stories publicly." So fine. There's your chance to prove it. You've had 60 days to come up with a proposal for a hearing, and all we've seen is 1/2 of one sentence in your letter suggesting that you would, quote, "remain open to discussing the option of engaging an independent third party to conduct a hearing." Don't say who, don't say how, don't say when. Most importantly, you didn't say whether the plan would provide the bipartisan public hearing that Vanessa Tyson and Meredith Watson are asking for. They've been very clear that they don't want some backroom secret deal, not some secret backroom investigation. They want a chance to be heard. So, if you're actually ready to propose or support a public hearing, if there's anything you would say yes to, then let's do it. Dr. Tyson and Ms. Watson have said they will not come and testify unless the hearing is bipartisan, which means you, the Democratic caucus, has the power to stop this, and you have the power to make this happen. So, right now, say yes. Raise your hand, nod your head, and I will ask the Speaker to call a recess. We'll have a Courts of Justice Committee meeting right now. Go downstairs in the hall, hear your proposal, and then I'll get on the phone. I'll get the lawyers from Ms. Watson and Dr. Tyson, see if it provides the public hearing they want. If they're okay, we'll be okay. We will schedule this today. Don't let this day end. We can make this happen. Just say yes. We Republicans stand ready to give Ms. Watson and Dr. Tyson the bipartisan public hearing they've asked for. We ask our Democratic colleagues to join us and give them their chance to be heard. Thank you.
Delegate from Hanover, Delegate Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request we move to first morning hour for purposes of a brief motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, yesterday our Hanover community was grief-stricken by news of a tragic accident in the Outer Banks. And in that accident, two lovely young people lost their lives. It is never easy to accept the news of untimely death, especially of such wonderful people, loving parents and friends. This news has the Hanover community in mourning. Holly and Alan Nicolette leave behind two beautiful children of their own, and more than that, Holly leaves behind a South Anna Elementary School and her students, where she taught for 13 years. Mr. Speaker, I move that when we adjourn today, that we adjourn in honor and memory of Holly and Alan Nicolette.
Delegate Peace moves that when a House adjourn today, to adjourn in the honor and memory of Alan and Holly Nicolette. All those in favor of that motion shall rise. The motion's agreed to. Delegate from Richmond City, Delegate McQuinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, it's been a long day, but I will be remiss if I didn't stop and think thank you for your cards and calls and emails and all acts of kindness. My eight brothers and sisters lost their greatest supporter, our mom. But the kindness that this family has shown me during this period, I am just so grateful. And I just wanted to stand today and say thank you. And those who know the power of prayer, just continue to pray for us. We believe we'll get through it. We know we will. Because that is the kind of faith that our mom passed on to us. But I know that each of us still need the support and prayers. So again, thank you on the behalf of my family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Lindsay. Got to watch that Les Adams. He's such a jokester. The delegate from Augusta, Delegate Landis.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the purpose of one last point of personal privilege.
Say, regretfully, Delegate Landis, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, when we left for the regular session, or from the regular session, I didn't anticipate that I would be joining others who have announced that they would not be returning to the floor of this House after this regular and reconvened session. As you know, and many of you probably have heard or read, an opportunity for service in Augusta County became possible with the retirement of the Clerk of Circuit Court. Now, after much thought and prayer, I decided that I would not run for re-election, but would rather pursue this unique avenue and opportunity to continue service. Contrary to some reports, I'm not retiring, but I hope to continue my public service, but just in a new role. Mr. Speaker, it's been a high honor for me to serve in this House, and I will not forget the friendships that I have gained in my 20 plus years as a member. I have served with 4 speakers, Mr. Speaker, including you. I have served with 7 governors during my tenure, and I said served with, not under. And Delegate Watts and I today are the only 2 remaining members of the class of 1996. When we came in, and that was her second tour of duty, when we came in 1996, there were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and this side of the aisle was in the minority. Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to go through power sharing. I've had the opportunity to be in the majority, but I would remind my members on the other side, I was in the minority at one time. Mr. Speaker, I want to join with other members thanking all those members who have chosen not to run for re-election this year. I want to thank Delegate Ingram, Delegate Bell, Delegate Helsel, Delegate Toscano, Delegate Pogge, and Delegate Garrett. It's really been a privilege for me to serve with each and every one of you, and especially those individuals who are retiring as well. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I need to thank so many people that have made my service in this House possible. First, my wife, Angie, my son, Roth, my mom, my brother, my sisters, and all of us know that none of us can serve in this House without the support of family and friends. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your confidence in me and your support. Just as Speaker Howell before you allowed me so many opportunities, I want to thank you for allowing me to serve as the chairman of the House Education Committee and chairman, or vice chairman rather, of the Appropriations Committee. Mr. Speaker, I especially want to thank the members of both of those committees, the Education Committee and the Appropriations Committee, for their support and encouragement as I have attempted to fill those roles. And Mr. Speaker, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a special thank you to Delegate Jones, who is our Appropriations Committee chairman. It's been a real honor and privilege to serve with him, not only as vice chairman, but as members of the Conference Committee, and being backbenchers at one time on the Appropriations Committee. Mr. Speaker, in addition, I want to thank all the staff of the Division of Legislative Services, especially Ryan Bremer and Tom Stevens, who have staffed the Education Committee. I want to, and I'm sorry they're not here now, but I want to thank Robert Vaughn and his entire Appropriations Committee staff for all the help and dedicated work they have helped and for me and many of us. I need to thank also Karen Gilmore, who's the Education Committee clerk, and John Shellhorst, the Appropriations Committee clerk. Mr. Speaker, let me also note that none of what I've been able to do and the folks that have worked with me have been able to accomplish in this House would not have occurred without the hard work, the dedicated service of our clerk, Paul Nardo, and his entire staff. Paul, I want to thank you and each one of your staff. Mr. Speaker, as many of us know, we could not do this job without the able assistance of the folks who work directly for us. So I want to thank my legislative assistants or directors that have worked for me, Peggy Sheets, who started out with me when I can remember, Mr. Speaker, I did not vote how Speaker Moss wanted me on a ruling, and he came to my office, and she protected me. I want to thank Nicole Riley, who's now working with the NFIB, Judy Wyatt, who I announced earlier is retiring. She retired April 1st. And also Will Robletsky, who is still working for me and will be through the end of this term. Those folks have worked for me for those 20 plus years I've served in the House, but more importantly, they've served the people of the 25th House District. Now, Mr. Speaker, over the years, I've also had the opportunity to have a number of mentors who have helped me become a better legislator and a person. So I want to thank especially my predecessor, former Delegate Pete Geeson. I want to thank the late Lacey Putney and Bev Roller, both members of the House. And I want to thank former Congressman Bob Goodlatte, who allowed me to serve and work with him. Mr. Speaker, most of all, I want to thank the citizens of the 25th House District in Albemarle, Augusta, and Rockingham counties for trusting me to be their delegate in this historic House for 12 terms. Now, Mr. Speaker, on a little bit less serious note, I want to thank my friend, the co-chairman of the Sensitivity Caucus, and I've got a recommendation for you. I think, since I'm no longer going to be serving, I think the delegate from Powhatan would be an admirable successor, and he actually has a sense of humor. He might add a touch of class to those awards. Now, Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, I also want to thank the members of this House for all that you've done for me and allowing me to serve with you. But I also want to remind you that the House of Delegates is the people's house. And just as we're about to celebrate 400 years when this House began as the House of Burgesses, we need to remember that we as legislators need to protect the House's traditions, the rules, the prerogatives, the decorum that's required as legislators, and most important, to uphold our U.S. and Virginia constitutions. Mr. Speaker, when I first started working for Pete Geeson, I remember one of his colleagues said about him, they said that Pete Geeson was a workhorse, not a show horse. And Mr. Speaker, for those of us that represent agriculture areas, we know the importance of that. We don't use horses anymore, we use tractors, but we know the importance of that analogy in that important industry, not only for the areas that we represent, but for the Commonwealth. So, Mr. Speaker, during my service, I have taken that simple reference to heart. I have attempted to serve in this House, not as a workhorse, but as, well, not as a show horse, but as a workhorse. So I screwed that up. So, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I want to thank you for the service that you provide to your constituents, for allowing me to serve with you, but most importantly, for the work that you do in serving the great people of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Delegate Landis, we go so far back, talking about 1996. I can remember when you worked with Pete Geeson, and you said it beautifully. You were the ultimate workhorse. You loved this institution. You always respected this institution. The work you did on education appropriations, and I got to see you in action in appropriations, you were always prepared. You were tough, but you cared about really good public policy. We're going to miss you greatly. Godspeed to Angie and Roth, who are in your wonderful family, and just thanks for your service. The delegate from Bedford, Delegate Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make 3 points today. and then to make 3 points about the third point. Since we were here last, we learned that 3 of our colleagues would be retiring from this chamber and entering their service in the General Assembly. All 3 have served with distinction, bringing credit to this body while serving the people of their districts in the Commonwealth. I'd like to make my first point about the delegate from Augusta, Steve Landis. Steve has certainly made a mark during his quarter century in this House. Those of us who have served with Steve over the years will remember him as being warm, friendly, and obsessively organized. This is a man who plans and files and orders and cleans and alphabetizes. This is a man who, unlike those who sit to the right of me, Steve comes to session and has everything carefully laid out with his notes and materials for the anticipated discussions, a clear role model for the rest of us. His experience and institutional knowledge of all these issues will be a loss to all of us. Steve has served for several years as a member of the Sensitivity Caucus. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know when I tell you Steve is the only member of that caucus who is the least bit sensitive. Having put his heart into this House, Steve has chosen to seek a new assignment closer to home. I know that in whatever endeavor he takes, he will bring an unsurpassed level of commitment and organization. Now, my second point, moving on to the delegate from James City, Brenda Pogge. She has brought quiet determination and grace to the House during her dozen years here. As one of the women As one of the women on this side of our chamber, Brenda has also brought earnestness. In our caucus room, indeed in whatever room in which our caucus meets, Brenda always sits in the front row. She is attentive and engaged. I suspect that one of the reasons why Brenda is so well known for having such a deep faith is that she is one of the faithful church members who listens to every word of the sermon on Sunday. She has brought that same level of devotion to her service here, paying close attention to the testimony in committee and on this floor. Brenda is retiring from the House to devote herself to the most important and fulfilling role in the world, that of a grandparent. She takes with her our appreciation for all she has brought to this House, and I wish her all of God's blessings. And now I come to my third point. But since this third point is about the delegate from Lynchburg, I'm obligated to make 3 points. Because if we know anything about Scott Garrett, he always makes his points in threes. First, as you all know, Scott is not always a man of a few words. But those words are always delivered with a deep sincerity. And one of the reasons why his words are delivered with a certain flourish is that Scott has a slight flair for the dramatic. Many of you may not know that as a surgeon, one time someone told me this story, that when the roads were impassable because of a snowstorm, Scott arrived on skis or some kind of snowshoes at the hospital to make his rounds when nobody else could get there, much to the surprise of patients that were looking out the windows at the snow. Second, as many of you know, this is Scott's second career. He is a skilled and successful surgeon. What you may not know is that Scott made the decision to run for the House under the mistaken impression that this would be a less stressful line of work. I think those in charge of candidate recruitment for our caucus that year may not have been entirely transparent, Scott. Which brings me to an additional 3 points to consider if you're trying to avoid stress in your life. 1, do not become a delegate. 2, don't serve as a budget conferee. And 3, don't ever read the entire budget. Finishing up my final 3rd point, what all of us see in Scott here is what Scott is everywhere. He really is that kind. His concern is genuine, and he really wants to help and to make things right. Whatever he sees, something he believes to be wrong, whenever he sees, something he believes to be wrong, we may not see Scott's heart on his sleeve, but it's always on display in his smile. We will miss you, Scott, in our discussions, and we wish you nothing but the very best. So, Mr. Speaker, there are my 3 points and my 3 points about the 3rd point. It truly has been a privilege to serve with these distinguished Virginians, and I will miss all 3 of them. Thank you.
Let me start with Delegate Garrett, who's truly one of my best friends. It's a really, really tough personal loss. I think Delegate Byron said it really well. Not only a skilled surgeon, I think one of the best in Virginia. A lot of us don't have any idea how many people you saved and what an incredible career you had. And then to come here and your love for this institution, and you do wear your heart on your sleeve. That's what I love about you. And you always remind me, which I never want to do, you say, smile, Mr. Speaker. So thank you for your incredible service. And to Delegate Pogge Rogers up in the gallery, what an incredible marriage and what an incredible family, and what an example to us. That's what it's all about when you come down to the very end. And you have such an incredible faith and such an incredible peace and presence about you. Great example for all of us, and you have such core values we respect so much. So we really want you to enjoy your retirement and all those great grandkids. So Delegate Byron, great job on both of those. Delegate from Stanton, Delegate Bell. Delegate Bell, if you give another retirement speech, that means Raleigh Ingram has to go.
I rise for an announcement and a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
No, I'm not. The announcement first, at your offices in the Pocahontas this morning, you should have found a letter from Senator Favola and myself on behalf of the Virginia Commission on Youth, inviting you to a foster care for legislators seminar on Monday, May 6th in Richmond at U-Turn Sports Academy. All members of the General Assembly are invited. I encourage you to attend. The release of the JLARC report on Virginia's foster care system last year was not that favorable. We have plenty of room for improvement. And I, along with other members of the Commission on Youth, are hopeful that this year's seminar will build on the legislative efforts of the 2019 General Assembly's work surrounding foster care and develop sound policy recommendations for the 2020 session. Mr. Speaker, just very briefly for a point of personal privilege, as most of you know, when we adjourned Sine Die, the very next day, my mother-in-law passed away in Houston, and we had 2 pretty difficult weeks emotionally for my wife, and you all were so kind. We got so many emails and cards and notices from both sides of these aisles, and I just want to tell you, speaking for her, we appreciate it so very much. And it's just, it reinforces everything I think about this place. And it's a great place. Thank you so much.
The delegate from James City, Delegate Pogge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take a few minutes, I know it's late, just to express what a high honor, and I know all of you agree, what an honor it is to be in Mr. Jefferson's house and to serve the citizens of Virginia for the last 12 years. And I rank it as one of my highest honors. I have a few more, being a wife and a mother and a grandmother. And so I came here because of the children and the grandchildren, because of words from Mr. Jefferson himself when he said that we have been endowed with our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But he goes on farther, and I think it's one that we don't think of a lot, and he said that to secure these rights, and that's why we're here, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I came here and elected in 2007 by the consent of the governed of my 96 House district, and I've been here truly to secure those rights. And I just hope and pray that the members here will consider what our job here is to secure our God-given rights of life, just like the rally was out there today expressing their thoughts about the right to life, liberties, that we don't encroach on the citizens of Virginia with more regulations and more taxes and more restraints, and the pursuit of happiness, that we will take into to mind the rights of the people to live in peace and to enjoy their own property and to keep it. And so I just want to thank all of you for your heart of why you came, and to just keep on thinking of the people of Virginia, and to think about your responsibility to always be willing to secure their rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I want to thank my husband, my biggest supporter, and my aide, Amanda Batten, who has served me for the last 6.5 years, and really, she could have done it without me. I think all of y'all think that, too, about your aide sometimes. And also, one day, I know you all had to make the hard decision just to throw your hat in the ring to start with, but the decision to leave is even harder. So thank you all for your service. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for doing such a great job. And I won't miss, but I will miss my job here of being the den mother, of keeping these guys. I've been surrounded by rascals ever since I've been And when Speaker Howe was here, he would look over here because they were always cutting up or mooing or clucking or barking. And I would have to do this. Shh, the Speaker's looking at you, stop. So I will miss them because they have kept me awake all these 12 years. Just kidding. I had to keep from laughing before the Speaker looked at me. So thank you, everybody. God bless you, and God bless America.
Delegate from Lynchburg, Delegate Garrett.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, when I was driving here this morning with my legislative aide, Sarah Owen, she asked me, "Are you going to give a speech?" And I said, no. You know, we got plenty of work to do today, and the hour is late, and I respect that. So, but there are a couple things that I would like to be brief, I would like to be brilliant, and then I would like to be gone. The three things, absolutely. I'm going to do something a little unorthodox, Mr. Speaker, and with your forbearance and the forbearance of the House. Someone once wiser than me said, they will not long remember what you said or what you did, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. How you made them feel. So with your forbearance, Mr. Speaker, would every colleague of mine, member of the House, that has worn the cloth of the military of the United States, would you please rise, please? Every man and woman that's served in our... Mr. Speaker, none of these men or women knew me and my wife before they chose to serve and to defend me and what I believe in this Commonwealth, in this country. So I want the rest of my colleagues to join me in thanking these veterans, these men and women who chose to defend us every day. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I don't have stories of Texas, and I still love my wife dearly. But I do want to share an interesting story very briefly, sir, because the hour is late, and I'll try to make it brief. When I was running in 2010, the former Speaker, Vance Wilkins, lives in Amherst County, and his nickname is Buster. I've known him for 30 years. One of his daughters married my younger brother, so I've known Buster for over 30 years in the family. And Buster put together a barbecue, and there were about 50 people there. And I knew I needed to make an impression upon the Speaker of the House, right? Because he knew what was going on. So I went there, and I made a point to literally look every person in the eye and shake their hands, introduce myself, and tried to memorize their names. I really wanted to know who these folks were. And I did so. And then I went back to Speaker Wilkins, and I stood there, and he sort of kept looking at me like, "You're looking at me, Mr. Speaker." And I knew something was just not kosher. And after a fashion, he said, "Well, have you met everybody here?" And the way he said it, I knew that I hadn't. So I looked around at everybody, and golly day, I just thought I really did meet everybody. I thought I could actually tell them their names, which is, I'm not great with names. But the way he said it, then I said, well, maybe he's testing me, right? He's the Speaker, you're testing his candidates and so forth. So I looked at him just like I'm looking at Chairman Ark, and I said, "Yes, sir, I've met everybody here." And he kept looking at me and kept looking at me. And finally he said, "Well, have you met the two ladies in back?" And there were two ladies in back. They were preparing all the barbecue and the folks that were doing the work. And I tucked my tail, went back in the back in the kitchen there, and introduced myself to them, told them I was running for the House of Delegates, and it turns out they're both from Buckingham County, which is not part of my district, right? So, and Vance knew this. So then I walked back out to him, and he just kept looking at me and just kept looking at me, and finally broke out in a little smile. And this is my message to you all. He said, "Scott, they ain't never going to vote for you, but they'll never forget you. They'll never forget you because you treated them like they mattered." Mr. Speaker, when I first got elected, somebody here said, "Oh, you know, the greatest honor of my life is to get elected to the House of Delegates, walk through those doors and have the privilege of sitting on the floor." And I have to tell you a little secret, Mr. Speaker. The greatest honor of my life was not getting elected to the House of Delegates. Greatest honor in my life was when this beautiful young lady accepted my ring on her finger. The second greatest honor in my life. Despite, you all heard my story, Whitney was high-risk OB. We went to Charlottesville. We had that ultrasound, 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters. The second greatest honor in my life was when Tyler was born, 16 years ago. And the third greatest honor, is when Haley Ray was born 14 years ago. So, Mr. Speaker, they're now teenagers, and every teenager deserves a dad. They need a dad, but they deserve a dad. So, my health is fine, my family health is fine, I'm not leaving this, go do some other gig, I'm not going to work for a college or university or for lobbyists or any of that stuff. I'm going to go home and try to make sure that I continue to honor and respect and love the lady that I have, good Lord's given me the privilege of being with for 23 years, and to make sure my two teenagers grow up to be productive and responsible and loving citizens in our community. So, Mr. Speaker, I cannot thank you enough, sir, for what you've done to help me grow as an individual, in my faith, and in this job. Not so sure I appreciate the 24 committees and subcommittees and boards and commissions that I currently serve on. And I will close with this. It's really kind of interesting. So half of you all are saying, my golly, I'm so sorry Scott's leaving. The other half are feeling like the soldiers that are dialing away. Okay, yeah, what are we going to get? Who's going to move up on this committee, and so forth and so on. It is what it is. I'm humbly honored and so deeply grateful for this opportunity to serve the 23rd District and to get a chance to meet and to love, most of the time like most of you in this body. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I thank you, sir.
Thank you. Delegate from Fauquier, Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
No, I'm not retiring. Yeah. For those of you that have been here for quite a while, as we purchased those panoramas, I urge you to take a look at the first one that you ever purchased. And then look at the one now. And count how many people are gone. And how many people of those that you were able to connect with, to build friendships with. And there are people that replace people, and the process continues. And over the course of the few years that I've been here, there's been a couple of constants, Mr. Speaker. The gentlewoman to my right, keeping us rascals in line. In fact, we were so bad that Speaker Howell used to call us the frat corner because of all the pranks that we used to cause. And it's always very hard when you sit next to somebody for 8 years, you get to know them, you get to know some of their turmoil, some of their joys. You also get to know the example that they set. And you work to emulate that. I've had the privilege of sitting next to Delegate Pogge for 8 years. I've had the privilege of sharing a space with Delegate Garrett for the last few. He's been my office mate. And I've learned an immense amount of virtue from both of them. I will just say this. When it comes to Brenda Pogge, Roger, you married a heck of a woman. Good choice, my friend. She emulates love. love for folks she disagrees with, love for rascals, love for her family, for her district, and for her Commonwealth. And when it comes to working a piece of legislation, there are many here that work pretty hard, and she certainly does too. When it comes to the gentleman from Lynchburg, I will say this. I don't think there is anybody here that pays greater attention to detail on the legislation that comes before him than Delegate Garrett. And I'm gonna say this because I had the privilege of having the majority leader as my office mate as well. It's always nicer to go to Delegate Garrett because he, if it's a budget or something like that, he always has an answer without necessarily going through the book. Although he does carry that really big book that you all saw earlier in session. But if you needed an answer, even if it wasn't in Health and Human Resources about the budget, he would open up the book and provide you with an answer. It's, hey, Scott, how much is my school getting? Oh, no, let's see. Here's what your school system's getting. Here's what's going on. And that kind of resource will sorely be missed. But mostly I will miss the friendship and the willingness to impart your perspective on things. I still don't think you talk as long as Scott Lingenfelter, so I am grateful for that. Exactly. And I would be remiss without thanking Steve Landis for his leadership as well. I will say I won't miss Steve Landis killing my education bills. However, he always, whenever he did so, always had me working a little bit harder for an even better bill the next year. This place has an amazing amount of talent. All 100 of us bring a unique perspective. And the longer you're here and the longer you look at those composite pictures and the more people you get to know, the more you get to love this Commonwealth for all its unique perspectives. And I just want to thank you all, but mostly my seatmate, for keeping this rascal in check. You didn't quite keep Nick in check. But, and Delegate Garrett, we will miss you. Delegate Landis, we will miss you, and we love you. Thank you.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, Delegate Falk here was talking about pictures. And I rise to speak of one of our family that's also leaving, and I use this in the broader sense than just the membership. And this is somebody, I think we may honor him a little later this afternoon, but it's somebody that I had the chance to meet in June 15th of 1980 at Boys State. As a 17-year-old, I had the chance to meet a friend of mine in Boone City, my friend Jeff Finch, who's now leaving us. And if you look at the throwback pictures on here, one of us has changed greatly. Jeff has not. But even back then, Jeff hasn't changed in his look, but he hasn't changed in his persona either. Back then, he was a person that had a good sense of humor, quick wit, but you could also see the earnestness in him and the dedication. And if you look at what he's done over these years, serving this house, not long after Boys State, he came to start here, working in Boys, Lift for Boys State, come here to work all the way through so many years later. And over the years, if you wanted somebody to give you an encyclopedic knowledge of the house procedure, of the history of the house, of the rules, you'd go to Jeff Finch. And Jeff has been recognized nationally from the Clerks Association for all the things that he's done and the way he's operated and the way he's carried himself year after year after year. But I think the thing that I see, and not as a Republican, but Jeff treats everybody the same. Whether you're a Republican member Democratic member, when I was new or old. He treats everybody the same. I think that's a unique gift. That's a unique trait. And that's something that really is a public servant who has served this House very well and served each and every one of us very well and very faithfully. Now, Jeff, I just say to you, like I said, I wish I still maybe looked like that. You haven't changed. But again, what I will emphasize is what you saw almost 40 years ago in Jeff Finch is what he has given us here in this House every day for so many years. And Jeff, I just want to thank you for all your public service. Thank you for your friendship and dedication. And thank you for your faithfulness and fealty to this House of Delegates and every member here. God bless you and good.
We're going to do something very special for Jeff in a second, so I'm going to reserve my comments to them, but those are well made. Delegate from Loudoun, Delegate Bell.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for appointed personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I want to speak for a moment really as just a grateful American to a hero who is among us. One of the most impactful speeches I heard was a couple years ago when we heard the story, and he'll probably be upset with me for embarrassing him a little bit, but Gordon Hessel, when he returned from Vietnam. He was severely injured when he served his country. He received 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. And this war was not popular. When he returned home, he didn't get the hero's welcome that he so deserved. I served in the military almost 26 years. My service began in October 1981. The Vietnam War ended in 1973. And when I first joined, I would travel in uniform, and I would get strange looks, and sometimes people wouldn't treat military people so good. I can only imagine what it was like when Gordon came home. So I speak to you today as a fellow veteran, as a grateful American, as your colleague and friend. As you leave here today, I'm going to ask all of us to give him the hero's welcome and send-off that you so richly deserve then. Rarely in life can we correct something when it's wrong. Today we can. Thank you so much.
Well said, Delegate Bell. Delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I guess the theme today is threes. There will be 3 people from this side of the aisle who will not be joining us and moving on as we move forward. And brevity is because of the hour, not because we think any less. They would like to go and join the other body. I don't know why. Unfortunately. Delegate Turpin, a school teacher, is known for her hard work. We really appreciate her dedication in her first stint here and wants to go serve in the Senate. Delegate Rodman has such a big heart, a loving mother, somebody who's smart and committed to improving people's lives. And, of course, we just heard from Delegate Bell, who served our country well, has gone through some difficult times in recent months, but never hesitated and continues to try to find ways of bringing people together. I think, unfortunately, all of you are below me in seniority, so you're not going to help my license plate number at all. but we really wish you all the best of luck with your future endeavors, and thank you for your service to the House.
Well, let me start with Delegate Bell. You're so gracious to Gordon Hessel, but your service was outstanding, and I think you showed this House more grace under difficult circumstances than about anybody I've ever known. So you're a special man. You really are. We also really want to thank Delegate Rodman and Delegate Turpin for their service in this incredible House. So thank you all for all that you've done to make this such a special place. So let's give both these excellent ladies and nice women a vote. The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rise for the point of a personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say a couple of words about my three friends on the other side of the aisle that are leaving. And, you know, in this place, you get to know people mostly or best possibly in committee work, doing committee work. And unfortunately, I was never able to spend a lot of time with Delegate Pogge in a committee, but I've watched her from over here, and the 2 or 3 times we agreed with each other, I really appreciated it. You know? So, but I think of the people that are leaving, I think she's going to enjoy retirement the most. I have that feeling that you know how to do it right. And I don't know what that is, your countenance or whatever, but the other 2 gentlemen over here, for good or for bad, I've spent a lot of time with the last few years, and most of that time are on issues that are not partisan. They're important. They're in the weeds. A lot of it's in the weeds. And we're trying to figure out how to do things the best way, the best public policy. And that's why I was shocked when I heard both of you were leaving. I mean, I couldn't believe Scott Garrett was going to leave after he gets into this and does exactly what Delegate Weber was saying. He is into every page of the bill, knowing what's in it. Sometimes doesn't understand it, but knows what's in it. I do like Delegate Landis because he does lower my license plate 1 number, the only one leaving who can do that. So I appreciate that. He has the best use of colonial House of Delegates style language. If anybody in here, I'm trying to pick that up, but I can't do it. You're really good at it, and you are an eloquent speaker. So you guys surprised me when you left, and I'm hoping the best for you. I read a conservative blog. Somebody sent me a piece from that a couple days before the real thing happened over in Augusta County, and somebody accused Delegate Landis of being a rhino, and I said, oh no, I'll give him my phone number. This man is not a rhino. I know. I have been there. I have seen it. So I hope you take your conservative philosophy and straighten out that courthouse over in Augusta, which does not operate as efficiently as it could, I'm sure. So good luck with that, and I'm gonna keep Delegate Garrett's cell phone number on my phone, of course, because if I need to know anything about Civil War medicine or other items about this how healthcare works in the real world, I will have his number handy. So thank you. I've enjoyed serving with you. Godspeed to you, and to Jeff, and to our two senators over here that are going on. Three senators. Sorry, I can't keep you. No one's going to be back here, Mr. Speaker. You know, we are going to keep going without these folks. Everybody, what do I hear? Everybody say in on that. We're going to keep going without these guys and gals. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as I said, Godspeed to all.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Fullercorn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate Essafor.
I guess we've got 7 people to honor and pay tribute to today. I wanted to start on behalf of this side of the aisle and to start with our more senior members. Delegate Garrett, what can I say? We served on transportation together. And we dealt with so many different issues, from license plate issues to my car seat bill and others, and we really saw the full gamut. Both within and outside of the committee, you were always willing to lend a physician's hand and perspective on so many other pieces of legislation in your perspective. And you were, I think, vice chair of HWI as well, and so many different subcommittees, and we so appreciate your service, and it was truly an honor and privilege for so many of us to have the opportunity to work with you and collaborate with you. Delegate Landis, it's only been a year, actually, that we've had the opportunity to serve on any committee together. The Rules Committee, very new just this past session, but I've also appreciated the opportunity to work with you as we have over the years. Your willingness to work with me and so many of others on this side of the aisle on education and related issues. Thank you also for keeping an open door on the 13th floor, and thank you for your service, obviously, to your district, also as chair of education and vice chair of appropriations, as well as your commitment and dedication on so many commissions and boards and state councils and committees over the year. Delegate Pogge. So we've served together, I believe it's been since 2013 on Finance Committee. We've had the opportunity to work together, and I know how strongly you believe in all of your causes, and you bring so much passion to everything that you do in Richmond. I'm also glad that we've had the opportunity over the years to work on many disability issues, and quite clearly you're not afraid to step up and take responsibility, demonstrated by your service over the years as vice chair on both education and also Finance Committee, and also in addition to so many different boards and commissions. And thank you also for your service on the Disability Commission, which is so near and dear to so many of our hearts. Thank you. Deputy Clerk Jeff Finch, where to begin? Where is Jeff? Hi, Jeff. I can't see you from here. You are certainly one of the most important cogs in our operation, and you've been at this body since 1981, since the 81 session, I believe you said. Hard to believe. And your institutional knowledge has been absolutely invaluable to every single one of us. You know the procedures, you know the committees like the back of your hand. And I think also on our side of the aisle, you're always such a friendly face to all of us. And we see you throughout this building and on the floor in the Pocahontas building, and we'll certainly miss you. You're always willing to help us navigate governing and approach every day with such a positive attitude and your smile. And also, you're doing everything that you do in such an impartial manner, and we really appreciate and value that. This body is truly better for your service, and I think we can all say that. And what can I say about our friends here? John Bell and Cheryl Turpin and Deborah Rodman. I'll start with John. John, we have had the opportunity to work together for a number of years, and you're somebody I admire and respect so much. And I really appreciate the friendship that we've developed. I also appreciate how you have endured what you have endured this session, and with such grace as mentioned. And we all respect you so much. You obviously have put so much hard work and effort and into being a delegate, and we will truly miss you when you go to the other side there. But thank you, and I know we'll continue to collaborate together in just a different way. And we will certainly miss you, though, in the House of Delegates. And what can I say about Cheryl?